Welcome to the Sentient Sky, a podcast on astrology, the cycles, and sacred intelligence.
Presented to you through a Southern Hemisphere lens by Yvonne Wildheart and Rebecca Holly.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Sentient Sky podcast. My name is Yvonne Wildheart.
And I am Rebecca Holly, and today is Tuesday, the 21st of May at 1:42 p.m. AEST.
Yes, and today we're going to be talking about Jupiter's ingress into Gemini, what it feels like, what we could expect, what the energies are, and just feeling those bigger shifts that happen as a big planet like Jupiter moves into another sign.
And we're also going to do a little bit of reflecting around what Jupiter in Taurus has meant for us so that we have some points of comparison. And we're also going to have a little chat about essential dignity as Jupiter will be moving into what's called its detriment in Gemini. And don't worry if that all just makes no sense to you or sounds like gobbledygook, because we are going to be going through that and unpacking the language together as we go.
Absolutely. So to begin with, we're going to start with a invocation, as we always do on this podcast, and a hymn to Jupiter. So the invitation is to close your eyes and take a deep breath in and open up your heart space and just allow these words to talk to you and through you. And as I light our candle, that will hold us as we journey this Jupiter in Gemini. And as we spiral from the center of our being, the void space within our very cells and our earthly body, we open up to your ever-expanding portal of galactic wisdom, knowledge, and consciousness. We call for full illumination of our unique universal map, our imprint of time and space. We call the stars, the planets, and all the spaces in between to speak to us and through us with crystalline clarity. May this transmission of galactic proportion shift us through the veils, expanding us beyond the realms of infinite creation. May we feel safe and held as we transmit this cosmic coding through our earthly vessels in service to the greater good of all beings, as we deeply remember that we are galactic citizens, ever-evolving conduits of the cosmic matrix, fulfilling our soul's mission and our beloved Earth at this time. And so it is, and blessed be.
And so let us speak the Orphic Hymn to Jupiter. O Jove, much honoured Jove, supremely great, to thee our holy rites we consecrate. Our prayers, our expiations, King divine, for all things to produce with ease through mind is thine. Hence Mother Earth and mountains swelling high proceed from thee, the deep and all within the sky. Saturnian King descending from above, magnanimous, commanding, sceptred Jove. All parent principle and end of all, whose power almighty shakes this earthly ball. Even nature trembles at thy mighty nod, loud sounding, armed with lightning, thundering God. Source of abundance, purifying King, O various formed, from whom all natures spring. Propitious hear my prayer, give blameless health, with peace divine and necessary wealth. And so that is the Orphic Hymn to Jupiter, which you can find and also find some of the other prayers and hymns from Orpheus at renaissanceastrology.com.
Thank you and welcome. So as we move through this podcast today, as we talk about Jupiter and Gemini, just really feel into what resonates with you. Some of it might not. And I think just open yourself up to moving through, and may not understand it, but just allowing the energies to speak through you and to you, and just see what happens. There's no right or way about astrology, and everybody has a individual interpretation, and this is just sharing what we see, and you might see something different. So go with it. Welcome to this journey that will be Jupiter and Gemini. And here we go. And if you have any questions or anything, please contact us through our Patreon at the Sentient Sky Patreon. .com. Yep. Yeah, and sign up. You can sign up for free and you get all this in your inbox, and there's different levels of membership as well. So welcome to today.
Yes, and if you to be able to discern whether or not what we're talking about is going to be particularly meaningful for you and your own birth chart, your own astrological imprint, keep an eye on your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising signs. But particularly for this episode, what you'll want to be looking at is which house is Gemini for you. So we use whole sign houses, and if you've had your chart cast, you'll be able to look at that and see which house Gemini is numbered as, whether it's the first house, the seventh house, the fourth, the 11th. And that will give you a little bit of an idea on where in the life some of these things is going to be happening. So as an example, Taurus is moving out of my, Jupiter is moving out of my 10th house in Taurus and into my 11th house of Gemini. And the 11th house is all about friends, the greater community. It's about the world at large. It's about alliances and things like that. So that will be the areas of the life that moves into for me, and everyone's will be a little bit different. And the powerful thing about connecting with the house is that it gives you a more personal sense of how and where Jupiter might show up over this next 12 months.
Yeah. And for me, Gemini is in my 12th house. So the unseen realm, the void, hidden things, the space in between. So this is going to be a really interesting transit coming from Taurus for me personally, which was in my 11th house, which was so much fun, into this unknown expansion. Who knows? Like, it's something that I probably won't even know, but just sort of feel because it's unseen. But we'll see what happens. And remembering that all the transit times that we show on today's podcast are all in Australian Eastern Standard Time. So if you are listening to this somewhere else in the world that isn't Eastern Australia, just adjust it to your time. And there's so many tools you can do that with. So welcome.
Yes, and look, most of the we'll be looking at a handful of charts today, and most of them won't matter if it's a few hours or even a day or a half a day out, because the transits we're looking at today are working with such slow-moving planets that even for a couple of weeks before the exact alignment, we'll be feeling the movement and the transit anyway. But absolutely just adjust it for your own time zone if you really want to connect with that exact time and moment. And so Jupiter spends 1 year in each sign. So when we're talking about Jupiter moving from Taurus and into Gemini, we're talking about the end of a 1 year period and the beginning of a new 1 year period. And so Jupiter will be moving into Gemini on May 26th at 9:15 a.m. AEST, and Jupiter will be there until June the 10th, 2025.
So what we're going to do today in today's podcast, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Jupiter itself and the energies that Jupiter holds. We're going to talk a little bit about Gemini and that sign of what that energy holds. And then we're going to have a look about, what Jupiter did in Taurus, which is just coming out now. And then we're going to spend some time on Jupiter's journey through Gemini over the next 12 months. So let's begin, shall we?
Let's go. So should we talk a little bit about Jupiter itself first?
Absolutely. Let's go.
So Jupiter is sometimes referred to as the greater benefic. And so there are two benefic planets, with Jupiter being the greater and Venus being the lesser. And benefic literally just means like beneficial. It's good. So Jupiter brings great good, great abundance, great growth, and opportunity and wisdom. And so wherever Jupiter is moving through an area of the chart, you can be sure that area is really getting an overhaul in terms of how we connect to that part of our life in wise, knowledgeable, well thought out ways. But Jupiter also rules things like spirituality and sacred things and religion. So Jupiter can also bring aspects of the sacred to certain areas of our life as it moves through the chart as well.
Yeah. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is the Archer, which is opposite to Gemini, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But this idea of this Archer throwing it out into the cosmos for higher expansion, and also is a co-ruler of Pisces, which is unbounded, mutable water. It's like, what even is water when it's like floating in the ether? It's this energy of openness and expansion. But it's interesting with Jupiter, it comes before Saturn. So if we were to line up all the planets, you got, Earth, Mars, then Jupiter, and then Saturn, who's the boundary keeper. So Jupiter almost can only expand so far, and until it hits like this boundary that needs to look at to go further. And once it breaks through Saturn, and then we're sort of in Uranus, which is the ultimate, game changer expansion. So yes, this idea that Jupiter is very expansive, yes, but there's also there's something about when we get to so far with Jupiter, there's something of responsibility that we have to take to take it further. So
absolutely. And you can follow that journey, as Yvonne was saying, by looking at Jupiter's rulership of Sagittarius and then moving through Saturnian ruled Capricorn and Aquarius, and then into, again, Jupiter ruled Pisces. So it's this really beautiful way of imagining and connecting with what Jupiter brings, is that it opens things up and allows us to connect with what is true for us. Jupiter is really connected to truth and truth seeking, particularly when it's in Sagittarius. And then we shift into that Saturnian realm of the structure building and the responsibility and the edges of what we can and can't do too, because we don't just have constant expansion and constant growth. There's a fluctuation that happens in and out, like the breath, breathing in. We can't just breathe in forever. There's got to be an exhale at some point, and then we do the exhale and back in again. And Jupiter and Saturn really are that breath that work together. And so when we look at that bigger picture of the wheel of the zodiac, and the way that the different sign rulerships move, when we look at that interaction between Jupiter and Saturn, we can see that Jupiter bookends those two Saturnian signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. And it's a beautiful way to help us or encourage us to lean into that growth, knowing that we can come back in and refine things and get better through repetition and labor, which is what Saturn brings.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so this reflection of what that Jupiterian energy brought to this fixed Earth Taurus that's been journeying here for the last 12 months since May last year, 2023. And this energy that is expanding on the fixed Earth realm. So it's been really interesting, this Jupiter who wants to expand and wants to grow and wants to move. And this Taurian is, it's this fixed Earth, it's here. So it's can be a bit tricky for that expansion to happen. But when it does, Taurus is ruled by Venus. So it's like this Venus-Jupiter dance. But it feels like, because it's like this fixed Earth, it has brought to us this solid rooting in the expansion, I felt. How do you experience Jupiter in Gemini? Oh, it's Taurus.
Jupiter in Taurus. I know my tongue keeps tumbling over it all as well. I think that for me, so Jupiter in Taurus that's my 10th house. And so before that transit began, I was like, oh, Jupiter in my 10th, it's the greater benefic in my 10th. Like, my career is just going to take off, and it's all going to be easy, and it's going to be so abundant, and it'll be this and this and that. And even though things have been good and beautiful, actually what Jupiter brought was a reimagining and a stable growth of that area of my life, which is my role in the world or my career. It marked perfectly with when I started making herbal medicines again. So Jupiter and Taurus literally brought me into deeper communication with the earth and the medicines I'm making are things I'm planting from seed, or going and foraging and going on walks and looking for things locally. So For me, Jupiter in Taurus was really not so much about expansion as much as it was looking for harmony and trying to find how I could make the most out of what I have. And I think that the earth signs are really connected with resources and how we resource ourselves. And so Jupiter in Taurus in my 10th house was very much about how can I more sustainably resource myself and connecting to the earth as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me personally, it was in my 11th house. Taurus is in my 11th house of community and groups and, doing things for the collective. And I just remember when my friends and I were out camping in this wild bushland when that Jupiter was moving into Taurus. And instantly I felt this expansion, not just of my community of people, but just being in this forest and realizing this expansive sense of community is actually in the trees and the waters and the sky and the stars, like this greater collective energy that wasn't just humans, but it was rich from the earth and this reflection. It was just such a beautiful moment of realization of this expansion, Jupiter, of community, of something that is greater than what we are, like humans. But it was also the trees that are from the earth, and having a conversation with these trees that are sentient beings, and we know that. But yeah, it was just this realization on a whole nother level of, yeah, it was really, really profound for me, and how that has grown over the last 12 months of really calling in these elementals, as community, as kin, to work with us and to speak through us and for the greater collective. It's been really powerful. I've really enjoyed this Jupiter moving through my 11th house in Taurus. It's brought this deeply rooted trust in the greater collective in general. Yeah, it's been very profound for me to have Jupiter also, and as it's moved and it's had these conversations with Uranus and especially Uranus actually, and this changer's perspective of what that actually means has taken me personally to a whole new level. So yeah, it'd be awesome, I think, if you are in our Patreon or listening to YouTube, to make comment of how this Jupiter in Taurus has been for you and what house it's been. And yeah, I think it'd be great as a general research for everybody to know what that feels like for other people and where it's falling in your chart. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I'd love to know. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
And so I think that a theme that I'm hearing in both of our experiences is that Jupiter really opened up our idea of what we thought was possible, and that was what expanded. It was like I kind of came in with like, well, my role in the world is this, my career is this, but a year later, my idea of what my career is or my role in the world is wildly blown open, and it's much more in alignment with how I want to show up today, my day-to-day life. And so yes, there was this expansive moment, but it was that it's so grounded in what's possible. And I think that, yeah, Jupiter will never throw you out to that Piscean sea without an anchor, like it's got to be grounded in reality as well. And I can hear that for you, Yvonne, too, that your idea of what community or belonging was, or what that wider landscape of that web of cosmic life that just opened too. So it makes me really curious about what that's going to look like when Jupiter moves into these new areas of our charts, of what did we think was the limit of something, and where is Jupiter going to knowingly smile at us and kind of go, oh sister, you ain't seen nothing yet, and sort of open up a new door.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So it's such a very different energy to this Taurian Jupiterian experience. We now get to experience Gemini is mutable air. It's so almost feels like such a contrast of, this deep rooted in the earth. And then we're now with Jupiter moving into Gemini, it's like we're being wished back up into this air element, but it's movable. It moves really fast and easefully. And what does that look like with this expansive planet that wants us to, go with it and to go here and go here? But it's really interesting. This Gemini ruled by Mercury. Mercury moves really fast, and it's curious and it wants to play, but it's like this, the symbol is the twins. It's duality. It's this or this, and for me too, especially in the 12th house, for me personally, I really feel it's like parallel universes at times. It's like, is it this timeline or is it this timeline? But it doesn't matter because they all meet on the top and bottom. It's just how you get there. And that communication and that language and that cognitive, it brings us back to our minds and our brain, and how does that work? And it's such a different energy to, Jupiter is so far away from its home sign Sagittarius, like it's opposite. Gemini and Sagittarius are opposites. And so this Jupiter and Sagittarius, it's expansive and it goes out to the stars, and it's long distance travel. But with Gemini, it's back here and it's day to day and it's this and it's such a different energy to what that Jupiter and Sagittarius being at home back to where it's so far from home. It's in its exaltation. It's sort of come in, and it's like, well, how do you expand in your day-to-day, everyday mundane, and how do you move with that short-term movement as we go through?
Yeah, I think when I think about Gemini, I think about the kinds of conversations that we have when we're so present and the words feel electric and alive and you're bouncing off each other. And it's that to not be thinking too hard about what you're going to say next, because you're just so in the present, receiving the fullness of the communication that's happening, knowing that communication is not just the moment in which we are speaking to another person, but also the moment in which we are reading someone's body language and watching the way their eyes shine when they talk about something that they love. Like that's that Gemini curiosity and play and the banter and the there's such an incredible, and I think that this is part of the gift of the air element, is that there's something about being so adaptable and flexible in the present moment, to not be in that big expansive Saggy Jupiter way, which is thinking about all of the bigger picture at once, and you're kind of flying out to all these different places and these different timelines. And with Gemini, you're holding that electricity within this shorter, more intimate realm. It's the same and a different thing all at once. But I think that what I think of when I think of Gemini is like the way that we know our local streets so well, like a place that's home to us, and those places that we travel again and again in the day-to-day movements of our lives. And it's the barista that knows you by name, and it's the neighbors that you wave to on the street, and it's the dog that barks at you at that same fence that gives you a fright every time you walk past it. There's something about that Gemini connecting of the present moment and the play that comes through there. And so thinking about, how does Jupiter light that area up with its wisdom? How does Jupiter make that sacred? Like, I think that's actually a really beautiful question, as like a way in of thinking about what is Jupiter going to bring to Gemini. And even though Jupiter is in terms of the dignity scheme, Jupiter is what we call in its detriment in Gemini, which just means it's far from home. As Yvonne was saying, Jupiter has its home in Sagittarius, which is what we call its domicile. And that axis of opposition holds Gemini and Sag on either side. And so where Jupiter may be more comfortable with the wild storytelling and seeking and long traveling nature of Sagittarius, how does Jupiter make Gemini sacred? And
I'm just
One of,
thinking, sorry, I was just thinking, I just wanted to add what's coming to mind as we're speaking of this is the macrocosm and the microcosm, and
mm,
just really seeing like that flower that you walk past outside your front door and going into that detail, which is the Mercury energy, and looking for the cosmos within the flower, as opposed to looking out there and above, which is very Sag, Jupiter and Sag, but coming back to that, seeing the spirals or the sacred geometry in the flower that's right in front of you as you walk past it every single day, and then expanding into that and what that sacredness is within that. And it's really interesting just thinking of that Jupiter coming off the back of Taurus, which is fixed earth, which is from the earth, and then it's coming out, and we're looking at from the product of that Taurian Jupiter and seeing it in a flower or something that's outside of the earth now. It's sprouted and we're looking at it and we're looking at the beauty of it.
oh, I love that so
Mm.
much. It makes me think of you know, it and we both have Sagittariums, Yvonne and I. So keep that in mind as we talk about the Saggy Gemini axis. We are fish out of water here. But it makes me think of, choosing to use the dandelions that grow in your lawn rather than ordering some super expensive, endangered whiz bang ginseng from another country. And I think like that's that exotic nature of new things for Gemini and Sag, but there's something about things that are exotic or that come from far away, which is very Sagittarian, as opposed to Gemini, which is really like connecting with what's here, like what's here now in front of us in this moment, and how can we use that to journey and to still have that journeying, because I think that's something that axis shares. Both Gemini and Sag love the journey and the tumbling of learning and conversations and communication. And I think that Gemini really offers us this view of how far can I go from where I am right now? Like, how far can we take this conversation? I think there's an interesting thing of looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think also, Gemini rules like the arms and the fingers and just that moving and that movement that it's bringing, but it's like in front of us. It's not like out there. It's that detailed movements that we use in our everyday, and to just bring our attention back to how do we do that, but bring that, and be allowed to expand into that. It doesn't always have to be, as Becky said, that out there and exotic and far away places. Actually, a lot of it's like, what's right in front of us. Can we use that's right in front of us to expand our beingness in it as well? So yeah, it's this, I can already feel it. It's like, oh wow, what is this expansion going to bring to us in our everyday mundane world? And I'm already feeling the transits that are coming out from this, but I guess also this Gemini element too, of having two sides of everything, coming back to go twin elements, and what truths are here, even though Jupiter is the ruler of truth telling, but there's two sides to every coin. It's like what your neighbor says might be different to what you think, and to maintain that, I guess, that Jupiterian perspective that, well, it could be everything in that, but at the time it might feel, this conflict that might arise in this as well.
Yeah, I resonate with that really deeply. I think something about Gemini is Gemini is very connected to data and like statistics and analysis. Like it's a very mercurial thing to collect data and to just look at well, this says this, and for there to be no subjective like embellishing of anything. It's looking at the data and wanting to come to a conclusion based on the raw information that we have. Where I think Jupiter wants meaning. Jupiter is very connected to the search for wisdom and to understand things more deeply, whereas that Gemini energy can be more about collecting the data that we need to be able to meaning make later. And so I think that part of the lesson and medicine of Jupiter and Gemini is how can we kind of like trick ourselves a little bit, or even just remember, and look, trick ourselves, that's such a Gemini thing because Gemini is such a trickster, but how can we sort of trick ourselves into actually finding great meaning in seemingly trivial things? Like, can I give myself permission to procrastinate and make myself a gourmet hummus before I sit down to do any work? And can I let myself do that and then have an epiphany while I make the hummus and realize that actually that was what I needed to get to, rather than to like read a certain book or to meditate a certain way? Like, I think Gemini really invites us to bring our playful curiosity in terms of like, where can I challenge myself to find meaning? And yeah, can it be in the dandelion growing through the pavement? Can it be in overhearing a conversation as you walk down the street and having a little giggle at a funny conversation you've overheard? Like, can it be the bus that drives past you on the street with a slogan which somehow connects with something you were just thinking, and then all of a sudden that crossroads of decision making, which is that very Gemini thing, is it this, is it that, like it's that totally mundane moment. Like, can we find meaning and the sacred in that as well? Rather than having, perhaps, I think sometimes that Saggy, in particular Sag and Pisces energy, it runs a risk of having a high and lofty idea of how we connect to meaning and how we connect to truth, and you know, that there has to be a certain process to learn a certain way, whereas Gemini, I think, is really open to just learning by giving it a go, or learning with your hands first and bringing the books in later. Like, can we give ourselves permission to learn in unexpected ways and to find wisdom in unexpected ways?
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because I've just noticed recently in the last week or so more and more conversations about how different styles are learning and how different ways that each of us pick up information, and how do we act on that. You know, you might be, you know, needing to see the structure first, the data in front of you, or picture it, and or some people might feel the information first. You know, it's like we all have different ways of receiving, and to, you know, that initial spark that drives us to learn more or to go into it more. But being open to, I guess, how people around us, you know, that Gemini closeness of people around you, like your siblings, but, you know, Gemini is related to your siblings, you know, it's the twins, but people close proximity, and how they are different to you in the way that they receive and process information. Yeah, that's been a really big theme recently, and I'm just clicking as to the, yeah, this is that Gemini, Jupiter getting closer into Gemini. So I think some key words to think about when Gemini, Jupiter moves through Gemini is curiosity. It's, you know, that curiosity in the mundane expansion that's right in front of you.
Absolutely. And I think there's also, as other keywords, is like things that are novel, or things that are inventive, or finding novel and inventive ways of thinking. I think that there is a deep bow to neurodivergence with this transit. I think that there is such an opportunity to see the beauty in all of the differences and what makes all of those things different. Like, you know, that not all of our brains take the same well-worn traveled path that our culture says that they should or would have 100 years ago or whatever. Like, I think that there's something about Gemini that just encompasses so many possibilities. There's so many options. It feels very inclusive. And I think Jupiter moving through Gemini has this beautiful potential to really connect with the inherent wisdom and trusting that our own individual ways of doing things are okay, and not just okay and acceptable, but beautiful and worthy and so needed and valuable. I think that is something I'm hoping to see and lean into with this Jupiter transit through Gemini.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's really needed. We really need to look at how our education systems run, even though education and teaching is in the Sagittarius realm, but this is when we come back to the details of that, and what does need to change, and really looking at these different perspectives that Gemini is bringing in to really acknowledge that, we all are so different in how we perceive and process our information, and also give it back out to the world.
Yep.
Oh, it's exciting. It's time. We need to do this.
It's so exciting. And I think that just the last thing I would love to throw in here is just to maybe talk a little bit about where this isn't so easy and where this might not feel so good. So just also just touching on some of the shadow side of Jupiter and Gemini as well. And I think that we've seen this in the world over many years, but I'm very curious over this next year around how the idea of like the media being manipulated, or how truth can be twisted to fit a certain narrative that somebody is invested in, or that something, or that a group is invested in. And I think that when that Mercury ruled Gemini and that use of data, data still has subjectivity and needs context, and it absolutely can be twisted to form and suit a certain narrative. And so I think that Jupiter and Gemini, we may need to be careful that we are shopping around for our information, and that we are checking the sources of things, and that also within ourselves too, that we're not jumping onto the first thing that perhaps feels right, but being open and available to, well, what else could be true here? And Yvonne, I think you already said this earlier, is like being able to expand our sense of, well, what is true for me may not be true for another, and how can I reconcile myself to that? But I think that some of the shadow of Jupiter and Gemini could be about how that storytelling, myth-making aspect of Jupiter can be used to either skew or hide the truth or facts or the data that lies beneath it.
Yeah, absolutely. And into, I think to call in discernment at this time as this Jupiter is moving through Gemini, and really sit with ourselves and tap into, how do we process information? How do we take an information? If you're kinesthetic, for example, you feel the information, well, sit with your feeling body and go, well, is this true for me? And to use that discernment that's going to be sung up, I think, during this time. And I guess also it comes back to knowing yourself, so this is an invitation, in the lead up to this Jupiter and moving into Gemini, get really familiar is how you process information, how you take in information. And then that's going to serve you well as Jupiter moves through Gemini, to be able to be discerning when, you might see something in the media, or you might, and just really sit with this information coming with you and say, well, is this true for me? Because it's again the two sides of it, the two sides of the coin that Gemini brings.
It's making me think of, I think I was in year 11 or year 12 English, and we were learning to read news headlines, and it was I think one of the first times that I had really purposefully been introduced into how a narrative can be twisted through the language we choose to use. And that's kind of what I keep thinking of is I think that there's something about integrity, and there's something about maybe tire kicking the integrity of things over this year, and as you said so beautifully, like using that discernment and knowing what discernment actually looks like for you is such a boon in doing that. But yeah, I just had this flashback of sitting in my year 11 English class, looking at news headlines and being challenged to tell the story without reading the story. Like, what is this story about just based on the headline? And I tell you now that it was not always what you guessed it was.
No, no.
Yeah.
And you know, this has been coming for quite some time. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens, especially as we look through the transits that we get to see. You know, there's a couple of transits which we'll just go on to next with Jupiter squaring Saturn. And this will be the first time that they're going to be seeing each other properly in this not this 90-degree angle since, you know, the COVID stuff started, you know, that Jupiter and Saturn conjunction. So which was really big for us all, you know, and then that, like, what is truth, what is not, it was very skew with, and, you know, seeing now lots of things coming out, you know, about what the media did during that time and accepting money from the government for certain propaganda. And yeah, it's really, really interesting to see this starting to rise up as we're getting, you know, moving into that Jupiter and Saturn squares, which we'll go on to next, I reckon. Should we start talking about the transits?
Let's do that. Let me share my screen.
So as we mentioned earlier, Jupiter moves into Taurus. Jupiter moves into Gemini on May 26th, 2024 at 9:15 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So this is the chart in front of us.
It's one thing to have a planet move into a new sign, especially a slow-moving planet like Jupiter. And I find it's always so interesting to look at if there are other planets moving at that same time. And so we have beautiful Jupiter, who 5 days earlier, the sun has moved out of Taurus and into Gemini, and around the same time, the Venus has moved out of Taurus and into Gemini. So Jupiter is sort of being chaperoned by the sun and by Venus as it moves, yeah, over that sign boundary there. And I think that it's like, yeah, who are you entering the building with? Like, who are you going to the party with? Who are you starting this journey with? And so that can tell us a little bit about how things will unfold, because this is how it has begun. This is essentially the conception chart, or the birth chart for, I should say, for Jupiter moving into Gemini. And the beginning of the story is that Venus is here on this same journey at the same time. And so too is the sun shining its light and its warmth and really enhancing that capacity for growth and for healing that Jupiter brings. And then beautiful Venus bringing in, yeah, I think Venus in Gemini really amplifies the play and the flirtatious nature of Gemini. So I think that we have the potential to move into this new season beginning with quite a lot of buoyancy and lightheartedness and beauty. And I think that that's quite a nice place to begin, given only recently we've had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which may or may not have been fireworks for some of us, and may have been lightning strikes for others. But yeah, there's, I think, a real play and a buoyancy that initiates this ingress.
Absolutely. And as we know, and just quoting our teacher, Jane Hardwick Collins here, and she's got Gemini in her chart as well, which is so cool that she's come up. You know, whatever happens at the start of the cycle sets a tone for the rest of the cycle. So if we've got this Jupiter moving in into starting a new, 12-month cycle with Venus, like, how freaking beautiful, and the sun, which is also doing this beautiful sextile still to this Neptune, which is coming back, connecting this Jupiter back to one of its home signs in Pisces. Like, this feels like bringing the dreaming that happened with Jupiter in Taurus into this new area of our charts or our lives, and to make it get moving, because that Gemini energy it's the movement. It's time to go, that and energy to brings things up from the deep earth up to move the energy.
And I think that at risk of getting too far ahead of ourselves, there's something really potent about Neptune here being halfway through that 29th degree of Pisces. We talked about this in episode 1 for our May transits too. That point of the zodiac where we move from Pisces into Aries is the position of rebirth. And so Neptune is really like leaning into that portal and that fire of finishing one part of a cycle and entering another. And Neptune doesn't cross that threshold yet. It will cross it in a year.
Yeah,
But it's
so
holding,
close, isn't it?
it's so close. It's holding
it's
the
unbelievable.
dreaming. It's like let's jump right in with a birth metaphor, right? It's like
I love it,
peeking through the vaginal canal and getting a sense of what's out there before you fully commit and come out into the world and dreaming about what comes next. And look, with Jupiter moving through Gemini for a year, it precedes so many massive, big, important changes that will be happening from mid 2025. This next 12 months is such a consolidating time before big stuff happens. And like we've already had big stuff happen, but there's a whole other round of big stuff to come. That's a whole other story for ourselves 12 months from now. But Neptune really is giving us the tiniest preview to that if we are willing to lean into the other worlds to find it. And because it is that sextile angle, it's a gentler angle. I think that you will have to go looking for that a little bit. I don't think it will be super obvious and apparent, but if you're curious about what you're dreaming into through Jupiter, pay attention to your dreams, consider some meditation or some journeying practices, or sit with your tarot and ask some questions of this, because this is really a very those dimensions are kind of overlapping and crossing very momentarily here. It's quite a mythical and mysterious moment.
It's really interesting. And I think Becky said to really pay attention to what's happening at the end of May, because with this Jupiter moving into 0 degrees Gemini, Uranus will be here mid next year. So, which is a fucking huge transit, Jupiter, Uranus moving into a whole nother sign. But it happens with other big transits as like next year is going to be really big because we've got Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto finally fully moving into Aquarius. It just feels like this is like the prelude to all of that. So things have been building for quite some time. We've all felt it, but I think this Jupiter moving into Gemini at this point in time is a marker point to say, pay attention to what's happening, write in your journals, do your cards, write down your dreams, because there will be a time, next year into 2026 as well, that you could come back to this and go, right. Okay. So Pam Gregory, another astrologer that I really like and listen to, and she talks about if the caterpillar knew that it was going to be turning into a butterfly, the caterpillar would be telling you you're crazy. So this is like this writing down what's happening right now will be a good reminder of how far you've come.
Absolutely.
And just thinking of that air element of the butterfly too is like this is the start of the metamorphosis of that caterpillar moving in and building its cocoon ready to disintegrate and to build something new. But you couldn't tell the caterpillar that will be flying around to all the flowers if it's just stuck on one leaf. Like
Yeah.
it would blow the caterpillar's mind off. Like it just probably wouldn't do it, and it'll just get overwhelmed and just say, I think I'd just say a caterpillar and just die. Like, you know.
Yeah, I'm not getting in that cocoon. You can't.
No,
Like,
no, no. That's insane. But you're telling me that I'm just going to transform every single body part of me and then I'll be flying? What the hell? Like, you know,
yeah,
and this is this moment for us, I think.
yeah,
It feels very poignant, especially after the Jupiter and Uranus conjunction that happened a couple of weeks
yeah,
ago. Like this feels like starting to get a glimpse of what that was about, but by no means is it, you know, it's just, you know, again, that looking at that sextile, this vagina, you know, coming out of the vagina, it's going, oh, what's out there? But you can't really, you can only get a little sense of the, you know, the bigness of, you have no idea what that's going to look like come 2026 when things, you know, have changed and it's done and it's different then. Completely different.
absolutely. Yeah, and Neptune is just hovering at such an important degree for all of those changes that, yeah, this really is an opportunity to lean into some oracular medicine, which is what Neptune very much leads us into to get a sense of what is coming there. And the other thing to consider too is that when when things are turbulent, when things are tricky, when there's a lot going on, Jupiter is one of the planets that we look to for support. We look to Jupiter of like, all right, what do we do next? Like, what does this all mean? You know, what do I do next? Like, what do I have that can make this easier? You know, like Jupiter wants us to be well. Jupiter wants us to be as close to that gentle curve of harmony as we possibly can be. And so, what is Jupiter helping us prepare for now while it's in Gemini? For all these big things that are going to come a year later, because pretty much once Jupiter is out of Gemini, like within that same month, that's when like bang, 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 a whole lot of these big movers also move. So this really feels like the Jupiter and Gemini story has a lot to do with what am I getting right to be ready for this massive rebirthing stuff that's happening a year from now.
Yeah. And you know, and we'll talk about, I can already feel the next chart coming.
I know.
And just highlighting here this trine here with Pluto, who is in retrograde at the moment and at the time of this transit, but it's like this transformation that's happening, but there's still yet work to be done, but it's happening, you know, again. But it's not just transformation. It's like Pluto is deep. It's the underworld. It's the void space of all and nothing in the myth, like in Inanna. It's you know, it's the whole entire cosmos of transformation. It's a death and rebirth, and this is like the deep riches here that are showing us what the potential is when we metamorphosize. But you know, it's only a glimpse, and we'll have to come back to that at some point because, you know, Pluto's in retrograde. So let's now show that chart, I feel.
I think so too. There we go. So this is Jupiter trine Pluto on the 3rd of June. So a week later, and look at this, like just like hours within the Venus cazimi having happened at the same time. Yeah, it's an important moment. And so like at this point, Jupiter has both a sign boundary from that sextile with Neptune, which kind of adds a little bit more separation, as well as starting to separate by degree as well. Like because a sextile is a gentler angle, we usually want to see it within a tighter orb degree of like 2 to 4 degrees to have that be really meaningful. So at this point, that separation is really occurring with Neptune. But then we have the exact trine with Pluto. And so a trine is also a supportive aspect, like a sextile is here. So that blue line with the triangle in the middle. But it's a more pronounced support. And so there is a strong, open, potentially constructive dialogue happening here between Pluto and Jupiter. Pluto, as Yvonne was saying, is retrograde at this time as well. So we have the god of the underworld. Like, is there an underworld to the underworld? I don't know. Is that what happens when Pluto
It can be.
retrogrades? Yeah,
Yeah.
an underworld in the underworld.
Depending what timeline you're on.
Yeah, totally. And so, it's one thing. Oh gosh, it feels like Jupiter moves into Gemini and Venus and the Sun are there, and there's this optimism and this like go-get 'em attitude that Jupiter is being cheer-led, and there's maybe a little parade happening as Jupiter moves into Gemini. But like at the same time, there's just like this hum in the background, and we know that Plutonian conversation is happening amongst the parade. Maybe it's kind of like two songs playing, and the happy song is at high volume, but you can kind of let's keep looking over your shoulder, like, is someone playing another song in here? Like, is there other music playing? And it is, my friends, you are not wrong, there is other music playing, and it is the deep dark orchestra of Hades, reminding you that there is something else there to be connected with as well. And we talked about this in our forecast, of that because there are so many planets bunched in one area, whenever a planet moves into a fixed sign or a mutable sign, there's going to be these aspects that happen like instantly with Pluto. The moment a planet ingresses, Pluto is right there at this 1-2 degree mark, ready to get real with a hard conversation. And Pluto represents not just underworlds and shadows, but also power dynamics. It represents things that seem immense that are actually not so big, and then things that seem like a really small deal, which are actually big deals. Like there's a real warping, like dimension shifting aspect to Pluto. And so this could be a moment where we are, again, like having to be really honest with what was our truth before this moment, and is that being challenged?
Absolutely. And I love what you said, dimensional. That Plutarian platonic energy, it is wanting to reveal the truth. It's like what is hidden deep in the depths, and which is really interesting, because what we were speaking before about this Gemini energy, it's like, well, what's real, that what truth is for me is truth is for you. So I feel like this Pluto will be calling us to go, well, let's cut to the chase, let's really look at what the fuck is going on here. And I think be prepared for things to be revealed, because that's what Pluto does, that have been hidden, and deeply hidden, and for us to really sit with that and just discern. And we said about Gemini is discern the truth, but I don't think Pluto is going to be quite here it is, this is what I dug up, and again, that retrograde of this is what I dug up from what happened back in 2020 or 21 or whenever, and and sit with that. What was propaganda, what was truth, what was, and what actually happened there that was hidden, secrets being revealed here in communication and media, which is Gemini energy. It's going to be really, really interesting, I think, also. And it's like this trine, this harmonious aspect is like, will just come and it'll be there. Like there'll be no hiding from it, because it's coming out. It's not a tension, or it's not a, it's just like, this is just how it is. It'll just show up.
And I'm thinking of that Gemini communication and the conversations that can come from that. This is making me wonder, like, what is feeling safe to talk about now?
Yes.
Like what is feeling like a resourced conversation about hard truths that until now has maybe not felt resourced or not felt safe? Or what did we just not know then that we do know now, that now changes and reveals that the truth is actually something completely different to what we thought it was or were told that it was. And I think that, you know, like if this was a Saturn Pluto trine, I'd be like, oomph, okay, like this could really pack a punch. And sure, with Jupiter it can as well, but remembering that Jupiter wants to build things into something that is beneficial and good for all. And so I feel like whatever it is that is dug up, whatever conversations do occur at this time, that it is going to be for the greater good, and it feels like clearing things up. It also, do you know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of when you've known something all along and someone said to you, no, that's not what it is, you know, like you know that your friend is lying to you about something and they keep saying, no, I'm not doing that thing. And they've been doing that all along, and you've been gaslit into then not trusting yourself. This feels like a moment in which Pluto goes, yes, my friend, you have in fact been gaslit and you were in fact onto something, and you can now go on trusting yourself again.
Right.
Like it feels like something coming up for the benefit of all, but particularly within that Gemini archetypal sphere of understanding and communication and information revealed and hidden.
Absolutely. Yeah. And coming back to exactly what you said, Becky, I'm just thinking of, you know, especially for those who perceive information through perception and kinesthetic, you know, like it's something that we haven't been taught to do. Actually, we're being shut down to feel and sense information. And a lot of us, actually, that's our primary way of collecting data. And that gaslighting in that perception of feeling like I felt that, like I really felt that, and how that's going to really develop a sense of another level of trusting of self. And yeah, I really love that, actually. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm suddenly a lot more excited about this
Me
transit than I was
too.
before. I'm like, I'm ready to have where I'm being gaslit revealed to me. And just thinking too, like of Venus undergoing this Cazimi moment at the same time, where Venus is having a rebirth of its own. And that Venus, it is too. It's the beautiful things. It is also to a point our trust in the goodness in the world. And so I think that there's a few things being really recalibrated here that are partly coming up as a result of something we didn't anticipate, that like, yes, is ouchy, and yes, there might be some regrets, but from here, our ability to understand what is actually happening feels more pronounced.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is something that we'll go over more for our June forecast as well, because we'll absolutely be looking at that Venus Cazimi in more depth there.
Yeah.
Want to jump to the next one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So our next main event is Mars conjoining Jupiter in Gemini, which will be happening on the 15th of August of 2024 at 1:04 a.m. AEST.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting energy of this Mars who's all about action and getting going, and you know, I feel like this flighty energy to an already, you know, already that mutable air that just wants to move and go here and go there, and Mars is coming in and just like, yeah, let's go, and not really having time to think about what's actually going on and just like shooting off. But in a really big way of that Jupiterian energy right next to it. It feels like, as I'm talking about it, it's this potential to say something without really thinking of it in the rush of the action, and then having a really big blowout because of it.
It also makes me think, though, of like the courage to speak the truth as
Yes.
well. Like it's the boldness and the courage of like, this can no longer be unsaid. Like
Yes.
this can no longer can I pretend this doesn't matter to me. And Jupiter kind of packaging that with its wisdom again, like just with its wisdom, it's sacred courage, I think, in a lot of ways, as well as having the potential to absolutely just be explosive. Like I find, I don't know if this is just because our last Mars retrograde was in Gemini, that I'm like, wow, Mars in Gemini can be really combustive when it wants to be.
Yes.
But just thinking of like the air and the fire and the way the oxygen can fuel fire. So this could certainly be a blow up moment, but a feeling that Mars Jupiter is also like the warrior in, I think, its best possible format, because you've got the wisdom and the cause of Jupiter alongside the boldness and the enthusiasm and the energy and the martial knowledge with Mars there put together.
Absolutely. But I'm just looking at this opposition to the moon at this time, this moon of the heart, this emotional body in the sign of Sagittarius, which is the truth teller, and coming back to what you said, is that courage to speak the truth that has been sitting there for so long, but needed something to come along and bust it out, to now everything's out in the open. It's expanding from that was kept inside. That's now, it's out. It's there, and it's for all to see.
And like, if you haven't seen this already, there is actually
Square.
a grand cross happening here. And so what that is you can see that there is this square movement happening. So we have Mars and Jupiter at 16 degrees of Gemini. We have that squaring Venus at 11 degrees of Virgo. So that's two mutable signs of Gemini and Virgo with that square there. Then we have Venus squaring the moon within 4 degrees, also in mutable Sagittarius up the top here. And then we have the moon squaring Saturn at 17 degrees of Pisces. So this is a configuration of enormous tension. This is an enormously tense aspect. And I was thinking about this because on the one hand, it's kind of like these 4 planets on the mutable axis. So every mutable sign has something big to say here. Every mutable sign thinks it does mutability the best way. So the moon in Sag is going, this is the mutable way to do it. We're going to do it the Saggy way. And Saturn in Pisces says, no, I'm in mutable Pisces and we're going to do it in the Pisces mutable way, and so on with Gemini and Virgo as well. And so it's like this pulling and this tense aspect, and like this lock that sort of happens. And it makes me think, Yvonne, of what you were saying before, of the buildup that can come, like the buildup of tension. And while that can be explosive and quote unquote bad, what this actually feels like to me is enough. Like this feels like a big enough moment, like particularly with that's 5 planets. 5 planets involved in this big square configuration. But within those signs, there's Mercury and Neptune as well. That is 7 planets having a conversation with this square happening. That is immense. And yeah, to have the emotional moon on being pulled one way, and pragmatic, controlling Saturn pulling another, and then Venus, in her fall in Virgo pulling another way, and then to have this bold, explosive Jupiter Mars conjunction in Gemini at the same time. This is a big bang sort of moment here. And yeah, I'm just feeling like I actually am so sore talking about this. My whole back and neck is all locked up. And, it gets to a point where you have to do something about that, and you can't ignore it anymore, and it's got to come out somehow. And either it comes out as an injury, or it comes out because you went, I'm not doing this anymore, and you go and have a massage and you do something about it.
Yeah. And this is really interesting, because this 15th of August sets up a chain of this energy that lasts. So this is the lead up to the full moon, the Aquarius full moon that happens on the 20th. So 5 days later at 27 degrees here in Aquarius. So throughout this time, we've also, this 16 degrees of Gemini where Jupiter is and Mars, and look at Saturn here at 17 degrees. This is a square that is tightening. So this feels like the beginning of whatever's coming up here. It will build up into this full moon. So this Aquarian full moon this lead up into it, it feels hugely, that tension keeps building and building because the moon is growing in its fullness. It feels like just talking about it. Oh, it's like, how much can we hold before something just sort of busts out of us? And the thing is about squares, it's a 90-degree angle and they're all pushing, the corners are pushing against each other. But at some point, it's a driver to action. And having Mars there as well in amongst all this square energy, it's like there's action to be taken from the tension. And it's not, I got to be honest, I don't feel that this is going to be particularly comfortable. Like, it doesn't feel like what we had, a couple of months earlier when Jupiter moved into Gemini with all the trine and the sextile energy with Mars, with Venus and the sun there. This feels like a contrast to that, but we do need the contrast for growth. So, we experience that beauty that happened, back in the end of May, which is so friggin' lovely. And then it's like, well, can you hold that and have a look at this? This feels like, okay, well, to get to that dreaming scape that you're calling in, that metamorphosis, there has to be like an underworld journey, or something has to be, there's a contrasting experience that has to happen for you to bust through, to clear whatever has been in the way of that dreaming. And so that is just as welcome as anything else. So to honor this time, this mid-August into the lead up to full moon, and just ask, it's the school of Saturn, like, can we make friends with Saturn here and say, okay, Saturn, thank you for showing me maturity. Thank you for showing me responsibility. And how do I move beyond your bounds to bring in the life that I'm wanting? And what can you show me that holds back my expansion here? What's holding me back from my dreams, and what's holding me back? Like, what needs to happen for me to get to that point of that butterfly point? It's like that caterpillar in the cocoon ready to mount. It's like, oh, can I fully let go and expel whatever needs to be expelled, for that metamorphosis to happen. That feels like the precipice of the metamorphosis, but this needs to happen first. And so just thinking of like the myth of Inanna, and she has to get to the underworld, which is a place of, all and nothingness. It's a dreamscape. But to get to that place in the first place, she has to let go of things. She has to, look at the things that are coming up to say, well, this holds me back from being completely bowed low and naked. Yeah, I have to let go of the crown. Do I really want to? Not really, because it's really pretty, but I need to let go of that, and give that up. Saturn, takes things away for us to go, well, do we really need that? Did we really need that? And what we find on the ascent, when things are starting, that butterfly starting to emerge, that, well, what we have now is far better than what we had to let go of. So this feels like this moment of just going, yeah, we need to let go of something. We have to, there's a tension there to express that we need to express, to surrender the things that are holding us back, to really come back into that dreaming that was happening at the beginning. So, and when this is happening during this time, to remember, this Jupiter and Gemini started with the Sun, Venus, and Jupiter there. And such that with that Neptunian energy, like that's the foundations. This is just showing us in this fullness of this full moon of how do you get there and to go with it. And I think the more that we push against this tension, the harder it's going to be. Yeah,
absolutely. And to give it context too, of like that the way that the Jupiter and Saturn cycle move together is that when Jupiter and Saturn reach that first quarter square, which is kind of like that first quarter moon phase, like that 7-day-old moon, it's the first real point of tension where the direction that the story of Saturn Jupiter has been traveling starts to pivot and change and needs to change its direction. And there's a tension that comes with that. And so this is the first point of tension in a bigger, what, like 15-year story. And so we can look back to what was happening to the Saturn, not Pluto, what it was like Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter stuff that was happening in that late Capricorn, early mid 2020, like what was happening there, which has now reached a point of tension, which is required for change and growth. And particularly like when we're looking at a configuration like this grand square, grand cross configuration, remembering that every single sign involved is mutable. This is mutability in hyperdrive, you know? So in terms of the tension, it's coming up within the mutable themes of change and transformation and decay and letting go. Because when we talk about the modes and mutability, we have cardinal signs, which are beginning and initiatory. We have the fixed signs, which are the middle, they're holding, stabilizing, maintaining. And then we have the mutable signs, which are like reviewing, readdressing, tweaking for next time, letting things go. It's the decay and transformation phase. So this is really highlighted tension and combustion and like breaking free of something within that mutable archetype. And so this is going to hit particularly people with prominent placements in Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius or Pisces. Like if you've got prominent things such as your sun, moon or rising or a stellium in one of those signs, then this is going to have a bigger impact on you than potentially on others. But the last thing that I just really need to look at here too is like just to throw another version of this story in, is that Mercury as the ruler of Gemini is ruling this Mars-Jupiter conjunction. And Mercury is retrograde at 0 degrees of Virgo, which is its other domicile and where it finds exaltation. It's also in its own bound. I'm pretty sure it's also in its own decan. This is literally as Mercury gets in this space, and it's retrograde. So this is this feels like full commitment to the review process. You know, it's like full commitment to going back and getting this fucking right this time. And the tension that comes with that, I think it's it has to be done. Like there's no avoiding it. And I think that even though that can be difficult and we might rail against it, I think that there is also an impetus and a motivation with that incredibly powerful Virgo Mercury retrograding, who's like, you know what, let's just do this. Like, let's just write down the list of the shit we need to address and get this all out in the open, and boom, there it will all be. And so that will be really interesting to watch how this plays out with that Mercury retrograde at that time as well, because it is a big part of the story as the ruler of Jupiter and Mars at that time.
Yeah, and it feels like what was brought up during that trine between Pluto and Jupiter, you know, about a month or so before that, it's like that was the seeding of what's coming up now. Is just like, oh, that was revealed. Oh, okay. And now it's like had time to be percolated and move through. And it's just like moving up. Like, I almost feel like it's moving up to the heart and brain, just going, hang on a minute. Right. We need to sort this shit out, because what was revealed back, you know, with that trine a few months earlier was like, okay, well, let's not make this happen. Like, we don't want to do this again. We need to change things. Yeah.
And even looking at, like, you know, the last chart that we looked at was June,
Mm,
within all of a couple of months, Jupiter has covered more than half of the length of Gemini. So Jupiter has just been zooming through
mm,
Gemini, and will be starting to slow down now for its retrograde station in October. But like, this is Jupiter who has just been like on the march, covering this ground in Gemini, but getting ready to start slowing down and retrograding itself 6 weeks from now. So it's also just thinking like, what has happened to this point where
mm,
that slowdown is necessary, and to start thinking about what we'll have to go back and look at again too. Like, it's interesting that this combustive point of
mm.
tension is kind of happening between the ingress and the retrograde, and Jupiter's retrograde station is I think worth thinking about as well.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to take a bit of a break while we go off and do children duties, but we will be back, and you watching this won't even notice it. So you might be just a little bit darker or something like that. So um, we will come back and talk about the second half of Jupiter and Gemini.
So your 5-second intermission has been a 6-hour intermission for us. It's now 8:45 p.m. So we have some very excellent mood lighting happening here.
Yes.
And
So just,
so
yeah.
you go.
That's all right. I was just going to mention a couple of things that we forgot to mention actually earlier on in the piece. In our little intermission, had time to remember some of the things that we'd forgotten. And just going back to when Jupiter ingresses into Gemini back on the 30th, is it? I can't remember now.
The 26th, I think, the 25th or 26th?
Yes,
26th
26th of May. That's
May.
right. And that zero degree point, again, how we talked about how important that is, because of the big changes that are about to happen with the big outer planets, and soon next year Uranus will be moving on to that 0 degree point of Gemini as well, which is hugely significant. But something bigger than that, if you could ever possibly get bigger than Uranus, but you can, is the goddess asteroid called Sedna, which is way, way, way past Pluto. It has a 11,500 year orbit around the sun, which is huge. Just moved into Gemini, 0 degree Gemini, on April 27th this year. And it will stay in Gemini from this year, 2024, right through to 2065. And Sedna itself is related to an Inuit myth where the daughter was. It's a big story. There's a couple of versions of it where one was that she was married off to turned into a hawk. There was another version that she chose a shamanic path and her father didn't like her to come, and he got her from an island. And as they were rowing back, a big storm whipped up. And to save himself, Sedna threw Sedna out. And as she clung back to the sides of the boat, he cut off her fingers, which is very, very big. This is, and the symbolism of the patriarchy and being the feminine being cast off, and then but also violently severed away. But from that, Sedna went to the depths, the icy depths, and from her fingers, all the sea life, all the sea creatures, the seals, the whales, the orcas, the fish, everything was birthed from her fingers. And so this renewal of the feminine and her ability to create new life, even when she is cast out of the boat. You had something really interesting to say about that too before with Sedna.
Yeah, I think that, in the story, a big part of the conversation is her saying, no, I will not do what you asked me to do, to her father and to those patriarchal powers that be. And so, there seems to be like systematic punishment that occurs as a result of that. And it reminded me, and I think I've spoken about this before, but it reminded me about this concept in Chinese medicine where when something becomes so yang, like you've got yin and yang, and when something is so yang that it's like 1000% yang, couldn't be any more than it already is, it actually completely flips and becomes its opposite, and it becomes yin. And the same the other way round, when something is so deeply yin and it reaches its maximum potential yin level, it flips and becomes its opposite and becomes yang. And we were talking about the symbolism of Sedna and how she, in her suffering and her deep pain in that living at the icy depths of the ocean, that she very much symbolizes fury and grief and the right to tend our suffering. But also what she symbolizes is that all life springs from that dark place as well. And when we think about a lot of what we're witnessing falling in the world, that there are a lot of systems that people are saying no more to. There are a lot of, a lot of father figures, whether it's literal fathers or whatever, even like forget the gender thing, but there's just so much of that patriarchy, do this or else. And there are so many more people just seeing that for what it is and refusing to do so. And that grief and that severing and the separation and the suffering is a critical part of the process for the new life to spring forth. And so if we can think that Sedna has just spent like 70 years in Taurus, and within a month of Jupiter moving into Gemini, which is a once in 12-ish years transit, is moving within the same month that Sedna is there, it feels like, again, like Jupiter just bringing that wise counsel and the sacred teachings that come from that suffering. Like when we were talking about the Jupiter ingress, we were remarking on how Jupiter is chaperoned by Venus and the sun, that what we didn't see, and of course because it's so far away, even out beyond Pluto, what we didn't see is this extraordinary story and this asteroid of Sedna there at the same time. And bringing that Pluto trine into that we also talked about earlier, I think that it's worth remembering that there is just so much that we can hold at the same time that seems contradictory. Like we can be as yin can be, and then suddenly split off and become yang. We can be celebrating a beautiful moment in our lives and an hour later be in deep grief at the state of the world. Like the capacity to hold that within Jupiter's benevolent, loving, dare I say, optimistic framework, I think is something that I'm going to reflect on myself. We were chatting before we started up again, and I didn't know about Sedna. I know the myth very deeply, but didn't know about the asteroids transit. So that feels like just this this extra layer of what Jupiter is needing to work through at the moment. And Jupiter is needing to chaperone that grief into this communicative state. And even thinking of Sedna being at the bottom of the sea and how lifting air is, like it feels like it's bringing the vibrations of her wailing and her voicing of her suffering up through the depths and up through that yin substance of the water and out into the above world where we're breathing and talking and communicating. Something in that feels really profound.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking of, the twins again with the Gemini is like these contrasting or these parallel experiences that we can have them both, remembering that the glyph of Gemini is the two parallel lines, but they're connected at the top and the bottom. It's just like these words that are traveling. Yes, we can be both and it's all one together, So I think this is what that Sedna is calling us to do, is to, yes, you know, see life in its wholeness and its fullness and embrace all the things, because if we don't, when the balance is not right, and I guess when it all comes down to Libra, it would be like, oh, what is this? But this, and again, because Libra is also an air sign, so just feeling that here we get to choose the wholeness, but you can be both and to know that it's all connected anyways. So that's really interesting. Yeah. So yeah, ode to Sedna. Thank you, Sedna, for showing up here in our podcast, because it's hugely significant, and I'm glad that we're able to bring her in, because Becky both and I have traveled with Sedna, very deeply. So this feels very poignant for us to speak to her.
Very much so. And I know that when we learned that myth of story together, it's where Yvonne and I met actually in 2018, in the Four Seasons journey with Sedna as our matron goddess. Is that part of the story is that the Inuit shaman would journey to meet her, to comb her hair for her, and to tend her, and to hear her wails and her cries. And what is that if not Jupiter? Like the Jupiter presence of making the journey to tend that deep grief, like that that feels like the traditions where there is still great emotion at a funeral, or like the wailing and ceremonies that hold grief and pain, like which is so absent in Western culture. Like, I think that there's a real opportunity for those of us who do and love this kind of work to be that Jupiterian tender of ourselves, and to, maybe even literally do this on around the 25th or 26th, is to just spend some time combing your hands through your hair and feeling the knots as they catch, and you untangle them, and sort of weaving yourself through suffering, I think would be, you don't have to have anything in particular to cry about, but we can still connect to old hurts, or the hurts of the world. Gods know there's enough of those, like even just tending the grief of the world, lighting that candle, brushing through your hair. Like, I might make a point of brushing through my daughter's incredible mane of golden curls that day, and just really feeling that process of smoothing things through, and there, and then the holding and the tending could be a really nice thing to think about.
Absolutely. And to remember that, Uranus will be showing up there in the same spot next year. So this is whatever is unfolding during this time is only the beginning. And yeah, it'd be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to talking about, next year when that happens and what that means for us all. But yeah, just to know that this is even more another layer of a significant point to take notice of, that when that Jupiter ingresses into Gemini, and this is why we're doing this podcast. Ta-da!
Totally. When we were talking about doing this podcast, I think it was March or April, and we're like, holy shit, we need to do this now because the sky is wild. Like, we need to get this started immediately because shit's going down in the cosmos.
Yes, it is.
And we're glad that you're all for it.
Speaking of shit going down, the chart that we sort of finished off with was a Jupiter and Mars conjunction, on the 15th of August. So we've just jumped ahead 5 days, and there's a lot that happens within this 5 days. But this is the first of two Jupiter square Saturn exact that's happening on the 20th of August at 6:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And this is like literally just after that epic Aquarius full moon that's happening at 27 degrees of Aquarius.
Yeah, like literally within half an hour of that full moon going exact. So we could argue that is exactly when the full moon is happening. We have the perfection of this first Saturn Jupiter square, which is like, I think that's one of the things that blows my mind the most about astrology, is that you never just see a thing in isolation. You're like, oh, that's a thing. It's like, oh, that's a thing. Oh, wait, look there, that's a thing. Oh my God, look at this thing. It's like, yeah, it is that whole sentient life form. Each chart is so sentient, and we can see that in this example of just how many things are going on here, which paint this bigger story. And so part of the reason why this Jupiter-Saturn square is so significant, and we've said this, I think, and referred to this a few times, where we've said, you know, these slower moving planets, these big outer planets, and how they're having aspects to each other, and the reason why we're focusing on those. And one of the reasons for that is because Jupiter is the first planet that exists on the other side of the asteroid belt. So there's an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and that asteroid belt encompasses the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and of course our moon. So what we sometimes refer to as the personal planets. And then we have the asteroid belt, and then we have Jupiter and Saturn. And then even further out again, beyond the view of the naked eye, we have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, who kind of come in and out of each other's orbits, right on the distant fringes. And so when we're talking about these big hitting, slow moving planets, that's what we're talking about. And it's because of their distance from the sun that to us, they move much more slowly, because they have a bigger orbit. And so when those slower ones come into these key aspects, it's important and it's notable. And it is important for the individual, particularly if it's really lining up with things in your own natal chart. But it's particularly important just for humanity and for our Earth, and for earthly citizens of this world and other ones. And so that's partly why we're focusing on these particular transits when we're looking at Jupiter's time in Gemini, is just because those outer planets, they're really in a class of their own, and Jupiter and Saturn hold somewhat of a duality between them, both being the greater malefic and the greater benefic. So there's a very important archetypal story that unfolds between them both. And the square is the first major point of contention after the initial conjunction that happened between them late Capricorn in 2020.
Yeah. And so if we think about that, what was happening around about that time, you know, and interesting enough that Pluto down here is moving back to that point where they did meet. So this is the really interesting when you start to look at the astro cosmic like spiral dynamics of it all, and you sort of have these timelines going back and forth, but these key points of the chart keep coming up again and again. And you know, take note of this area too, this mid area of Gemini, because the second transit of this square that happens on Christmas Day in Australia of the next Saturn and Jupiter square happens at 14 degrees. So it's around, you know, this mid decan of Gemini that's been hit. And it's really interesting because by the time this happens on the 20th of August, Jupiter is actually in its retrograde shadow. So the retrograde shadow is at 11 degrees. So, and we'll talk about this next, but Jupiter will station retrograde on the 9th of October. Didn't write the degree point down. Do you have it in front of you?
It stations retrograde at 21 degrees and will then go direct at 11.
That's right. So 11 degrees is about here. So this is sort of the shadow of the, you know, where Jupiter moves in its retrograde. But so it's in its shadow point. So we're going to come back again to review whatever's happening around this mid-August point, which feels really significant, actually. I don't think we've had this amount of tension in the chart since probably April and then it gets to August and it's like, oh, here it is again. We sort of get a bit of a respite, I think, in between this, but this feels like a very significant point of the year as well, compared to April, as well, which was extremely, very active. But this feels like the next active period, yeah, with these squares.
And I think, yeah, so particularly if you have planets or important points, such as your rising sign, between 10 and 20 degrees of the mutable sign, so between 10 and 20 degrees of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, then this will be particularly flowing, that tension will have somewhere to land for you. And so it's worth knowing ahead of time that is a thing that could be happening. And I don't know about all of you guys listening to this, but I know for myself that when I can see something like that in my own chart and go, oh, that's why I am such an angry motherfucker today, or that's why I'm so tired, like, not to bypass my responsibility for my feelings, but it helps me feel permissioned in how I feel. And so this doesn't have to be like, oh no, what's going to happen on the 20th of August? I've got my rising at 14 degrees of Pisces. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a harbinger of doom as much as it is just such deep permission to just feel how you're feeling, and to not even have to know more than that. You don't even have to dig deeper necessarily.
No.
It's okay to just be feeling the tension, or to be feeling more sensitive than normal, and to take steps accordingly.
Absolutely. And I think it helps to the process whatever's happening. You can sort of almost know it's happening in the chart, know it's happening, in your own cosmology, but to sort of bring yourself out to like a witness perspective and just go, oh yeah, I can see this happening. I can see this unfolding. And then you can, and this is why astrology is so fucking great, because we have this tool that we can use to bring ourselves in a witness perspective, and just to witness what is happening, and to choose to and make decisions from that place, as opposed to being in it and not understanding what's happening and being caught in all and getting all hooked into things. We can just sort of take ourselves up a little bit and just go, oh, okay, I can understand what's happening here, which helps you to navigate whatever's unfolding. So yeah, I mean, this is why I think Becky and I both love this work, and we both use it in our other practices like counseling and neuropathy and things like that. We can use this to allow us to navigate these bigger transits more easily. It's great. Love it.
It is literally the best thing ever. It's just this unifying language.
Yeah.
And something I also want to highlight here is that this feels actually quite messy to me. Like, this isn't a very clear-cut story of tension. And what leads me to believe that is partly that we still have Mars separating from Jupiter here. So Mars is very much playing a role in this square between Jupiter and Saturn. And so whatever sort of tension and combustion that we were talking about from the 5 days previous, there may be a hangover from that still here. So we have Mars playing a role. And so one of the other ways where we can get a sense of, well, who has the upper hand here? Like, does Jupiter have the upper hand? Does Saturn have the upper hand? And there's a few ways to look at that. And so one of them is by going, well, who is ruling these planets? And so we could go, well, Saturn's in Pisces and Jupiter rules Pisces. So we could say that perhaps that's 1 for Jupiter. So let's put a little imaginary 1 up there for Jupiter. And then we can go, well, Jupiter is in Gemini in its detriment. So that's a little -1 for Jupiter. So Jupiter is back at 0. And Mercury is ruling that and is currently in retrograde. And I don't know if that's a -1, but it's probably like a -0.5 a point there, because it's just like a little bit of wobbliness happening from Mercury. Mercury and the Sun, Mercury has just had a cazimi as well. So is very, very combust, is not able to tend its Gemini realm with ease while it is combust and so close to the Sun. And so there's just all these extra little things
Mm.
at play, which kind of go, oh, that's not clear cut, and that's not really clear cut either. And that could work, but then that kind of takes that power away. Like it does. It just it feels messy. And when we think too that this is the first of, it'll be a total of 3 squares that they will have, but the 2 that will happen while Jupiter is in Gemini. That of course the beginning of that's messy. Like that kind of makes sense to me though, is that Jupiter and Saturn are figuring out how to balance the equally important needs of contraction and expansion, and who's going to give, who's not, where the compromise will be, where it will not be. Like this is just the beginning of that discussion, and that's going to unfold over like a year. So whatever kind of things are arising here, it's also important to note that this may be something that's not so felt in the moment, but that you look back on and go, oh wow, that there was a moment there where I realized that could no longer go forward as it had been, or where I started to review those processes, and even bringing it back to an even bigger story of what was happening, mid 2020 for you, that this will likely have some roots in that initial first half of 2020 story.
Absolutely. And what also is catching my eye here is also this square is happening with Venus as well down here in Virgo. So this square, so I'm just going to actually draw the square because it's easy to understand what this actually looks like, this 90-degree angle in here. So it's actually a T square with Saturn here as well. So this T. So not only is it just off the back of this Mars and Jupiter conjunction, but Venus is here having a conversation opposite Saturn, and this push pull with Saturn, but then there's this thing happening in the middle. It brings even more confusion to it, I think, or it's it's just this, or what the feeling is. I can't even express it, but I can feel it on my heart, like I can feel this, this heaviness of the heart or something happening here that's just sort of a bit, feels compressed.
I think it's worth thinking about the fact that in this, again, like sort of what we were talking about of like, how can we chalk up who's in a better position than someone else here, is that Venus is in her fall in Virgo. So Venus can be a place of not being as well resourced, or of not knowing the terrain so well while Venus is in Virgo. And the reason what that's connected to is that she is in her exaltation in Pisces, in the sign opposite from Virgo. So she is most adored, lifted up, beautified in Pisces. And that's where Saturn is at the moment. So it also feels like Venus being as far away from that position as possible, watching Saturn move through that realm. And what does that potentially feel like? And I can feel that tension.
Yeah. It's
now
that,
too,
that.
yeah, like, oh no, like that's that's a $1 million artwork. Like you can't take that down. And like she's watching these things happen from afar, where
But
Saturn's
there's
going,
nothing she can do
this.
about it. Like she's
No.
in there just going, oh God.
Yeah, and Saturn's like, we don't need this superfluous nonsense. We need firewood. Take the painting down and put it into pieces, throw it into the fire. And Venus is just going, over in Virgo. And so it feels like, this witnessing of things perhaps not going as we'd hoped. And then we have this very bold, fiery communication happening too. And so I think, yeah, this really is still a little bit enmeshed in the previous chart we looked at with the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. I'm just feeling so strongly that this is the honest crap that we need to see to find our courage to change things and to communicate what changes are needed, and just looking at that connection between those that T-square of Venus and Saturn in opposition, and then Jupiter and Mars kind of being, where the arrow gets loosed from that tension. Like if you can imagine the opposition between Venus and Saturn like a bowstring, and it's that T in the middle of the T-square, that's the arrow that gets loosed, flies through that Jupiter-Mars conjunction. Like, how does that tension or that misunderstanding or just having different values, it doesn't even have to be like evil Saturn versus poor victimized Venus. It can also just be different values. Saturn's like, just wanted you all to be warm, like just trying to get the basic needs met. And Venus is still crying in the corner. And it's like what is being revealed there, where an arrow can get loosed into this communicative realm, and where something really gets spoken up for, or what part of yourself do you speak up for that perhaps you weren't willing to, or couldn't find the words, or wasn't sure if it was really worth the hassle, or whatever it is we tell ourselves to not say a thing. Like, I think wherever Gemini is, whatever house that is holding in your chart, that there will be something important to stand up for, which will likely involve communication of some kind here, and just feeling the power struggle and the opposing values, and how Saturn and Venus may be the tension that builds to then fire that arrow off.
And one of the things I've learned about Saturn, I've had a fair lesson in Saturn's fair lesson in Saturn's school, moon conjunct Saturn over here, is that, Saturn, even though it feels like harsh lessons, or it feels like, ooh, so opposite to Venus, right? But it feels like this element of the dark goddess coming, who fucking loves you so much, that really just wants the best for you. And sometimes there's a lesson in hard knocks to get you to see what you're made of, and to see how amazing you actually are through that trial and tribulation type energy, to say, see, you can do it, you can do anything. And this is, Saturn here, I think, showing us this. It's like, well, come on, you can do this. I know you can, but it's like that the element of Saturn, of the elder, really comes in here. It's like, what do you need to do to be an elder? You have to go through an initiation process. And that is actually not meant to be easy. That is meant to test you and to stretch you, so you can step into that eldership, so you can later on lead people the same way that the elder has led you, because it brings wisdom and knowledge through that. So, yes.
Oh, that was the pep talk I needed. Thank you.
I
love that so much.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So good. But yeah, and seeing that Saturn as opposed to the because he's the sickle, but there's the cross and matter at the top. So if you have a look at this, it's like, yeah, well, there's here's the harvest energy, but also it's the harvest energy as well. Well, how well did you plant your plants? How much did you attend? And if you didn't, Saturn's like, well, is that really eldership? Maybe you need to go back and have a bit of a look. That's, and that's going to be okay, because you're going to learn from this, and you're going to grow and be able to move matter even more so than you did before. And it's really interesting. Pisces, Jupiter in Pisces, my experience of this so far, I've had it in my 9th house of, higher thinking and things, is like this Kronos, the lord of time, but an unbounded energy of Pisces is like, well, what timeline are you choosing, actually? Can you use this experience of the squares to elevate you, to grow even more into maybe a higher vibrational timeline, that you can allow the grief and and stuff to be transformed into, well, what do we need to bring peace to the world? and to choose the timeline of peace and love, as opposed to being caught into that because we've allowed it to move through us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
100,000,000%.
Yeah.
Completely. That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and just thinking too in this full moon, like you can't
Yeah.
make this up. Like this is wild to have this type of exact, transit happening half an hour after the fucking full moon, right? Like
Yeah.
this is in the fullness. There's going to be no hiding because it's in the fullness of the sun, which is co-present with Pluto down here. Like it's in the same sign as the Lord of the underworld. um but this square, this full moon is making to Uranus here at 27 degrees. Like this is a square too, between the moon and Uranus, so it's bringing change, but maybe not so easy change, but Saturn's there, calling us to grow up and to move beyond, and I guess that's Uranus as well, that, which is on the other side of Saturn, saying, well, you can have this freedom, this revolution, but you've got to work through this from Jupiter to Saturn, then to Uranus. And that's where we get to experience the unbounded freedom that we've been seeking.
Yeah, and just, when we're thinking about chalking up, like, who's on whose side here and who's got the energy to manifest a thing or not. And this is a Saturnian full moon.
Mm.
And like you said, co-present Pluto, like very big orb, but still co-present nonetheless. And the moon moves quickly. So it's only within 2 days ago that she has visited Pluto herself and is bringing the end of that story into this full moon with her. And so Saturn really has some say in what is being illuminated and what is being brought into the material world at this moment. As that Saturn ruled Aquarian full moon. Yeah, gosh, and like you said too, like such a perfect square with that full moon with Uranus. Goodness me, I'm already looking forward to our August forecast. Wow, like that's a lot.
It's a lot. But not only that, too, I was just looking at, this Chiron here at 23 degrees, and it's like 3-degree orbit. It's forming a sextile between Mars as well, which in the next, week or so, that's going to come exact, that sextile. So there's something new forming from this Chiron of this wounded healer element. Like, so there's another layer to this that is still unfolding. Yeah, it's fascinating chart.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
when we were putting the charts together, we wanted to talk about
Mm,
every single one. I was just like, whoa.
can't do that.
It was never just like, oh, look, it's going retrograde here. It was always, yeah, like 17 other phenomenal, crazy, intricate things happening. It's
Yeah.
yeah, this Jupiter transit just is really big.
It's really big. And I'm just looking to, like, every time I look at it, see something differently. But you could go on all night, but we won't. Like, this is the last thing I just want to say. We will be here all night. But within the, probably a week of this, we've got Mercury moving back, which will form a trine to this Chiron at the same time that the Mars is forming a sextile. So if you think about the mercurial sort of rulers, of Mercury, but it's really interesting that Venus is Chiron and Mercury here in Virgo. So there's something happening here with this communication, but also this needing to sort out our pains and our hurts. Again, just thinking of Saturn calling us to step beyond, to become elders. Chiron's here to say, well, you can be, you can be the healer of this pain that's coming up. So yeah, just to add that in.
Yeah, completely.
Mm.
So Oh my God, we've got 4 charts left. Holy moly. Well, the next ones I don't think are quite, I say this now, but the next ones aren't quite as meaty, or maybe they are. Let's just have a look.
Let's have a look.
Stop talking. Oh God, look at that.
Oh, so our next chart is on the 9th of October. This is when Jupiter stations retrograde.
And it's important to note that from here we move into daylight savings time. So this is 6:30 p.m. AEDT, which is going to take a little while to get the hang of shifting in and out of that when that comes. And so, yeah, we have Jupiter stationing retrograde, which means that it has been slowing down for some time, and it finally comes to a halt, to a stop, and then it will look like it is moving backwards. And it's about 3 months that Jupiter's retrograde will last for, and it will retrograde from 21 degrees of Gemini, which is where it is here in this chart, through to 11 degrees of Gemini. And so that little period between 11 and 21 degrees is what we were referring to earlier as the shadow period. And so up until this point, Jupiter has been moving through that previous 10 degrees that it will be planning to retrograde back over again. And so when a planet moves into its shadow, it's this idea of that it's just starting to feel the threads of what that retrograde will uncover, though it's usually not until the retrograde station that the true story really kicks off in full flight and is more obvious and more lived.
Yeah, and note here, this is where that Mars was, was it sextiling that Chiron as well, which was 23 degrees. Yeah, about this point.
Yeah, so the Mars cycle is so tapped in with this. Yeah, and just seeing that there's also a grand water trine happening in this chart as well. So we have a what that is 3 trine aspects that meet to form a triangle, which you can see in the center of this chart here, between Venus in Scorpio at 19 degrees, Saturn in Pisces at 13 degrees, and Mars in Cancer at 19 degrees. And Mars will also be slowing down to approach, because it will be retrograding, I think, roughly that area too. So
yeah, it comes into Leo, but it comes back into it. Feels like looking when we're looking through, Jupiter's movement through Gemini, Mars does not actually move very much. It's not until sort of early next year in 25 that it actually starts moving away. But Mars is a player here in these charts for sure, because it's so connected.
Yeah, very much so. And like these big configurations where there are points that create a cycle that can lap and travel over itself. So whether it's like tracing the edges of a square that goes around and around and around, it's like an ongoing, it's like a messenger conversation with 3 or 4 or 5 people in it that's just constantly pinging and moving. It's different to there just being a trine aspect or a square. Like when they all connect and join like that, it's an extremely alive configuration. And so it's also something that doesn't happen as often as you would think, because when we look at these bigger configurations, we're not including points like the angles or the nodes, and usually not asteroids either. Like you can do, but the idea is that the planets, as physical bodies of matter within our cosmos, that they are able to hold a resonance and that they are able to catch the reflected energy and the reflected conversation, as opposed to theoretical points in the sky, such as the nodes or the ascendant degree. Like they're theoretical points, not actual bodies which can receive a vibration and send one off of their own. It's a slightly different thing. And so to have these really big, again, like just alive, moving configurations happening at these key Jupiter moments, I think just really adds extra weight to how much this Jupiter in Gemini period is setting us up for a lot of things. Like Jupiter is really working hard, I think, to facilitate the recalibration and the deeper understanding of a lot of other movements and planets.
Absolutely. And and coming back to the very beginning of that ingress, and look who was there, like coming back to say, well, we're well supported, but there's a lot to learn here with Gemini, Jupiter and Gemini, for the setup for what's to come. Like, this feels like, yeah, we've had big transits in the lead up, especially April this year, but this feels like where we're going to get a lot of information for what's to come. Like, we've had, it's like little explosions here and there, like the Jupiter and Uranus conjunction, and, that whole thing that happened with the Aries, eclipse back in April. But this movement is it's so Jupiter, Gemini, isn't it? It's all about we're information gathering. And this is what I really feel Jupiter doing here in Gemini. We're gathering information for what's to come, and all these transits are informing us of pieces of information that one day we're going to be able to look back, and it's going to be like the story that started everything off.
Yeah, and I think that when we see here too that we have a Jupiterian moon that's happening, and we also have a very closely aspected trine between Jupiter and Gemini's ruler Mercury. That Mercury is in a better position than it has been previously to really tend the terrain that Jupiter is in at a really important moment for Jupiter. And something that I want to just mention briefly that I wouldn't usually bring in to transits, and I actually meant to term these little lots or parts of here. We've got the lot of fortune down here and the lot of spirit up the top. That the lot of fortune is a point that is calculated based on the distance between the sun, moon, and rising sign under different circumstances. And essentially, it's just a place where fate gathers. It's a really sensitive point in the chart where fated things, for better or for worse, gathers and can sort of manifest through the chart. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because Jupiter is very closely conjunct this fated location for the retrograde station. And as we'll see in a moment, also for the direct station. So for both of the stationing moments, the lot of fortune is in the same sign and is in quite close proximity to Jupiter. And so to me, it just adds this extra weight of fate to it, and this sense of that everything is leading to something that has purpose being such an excellent Jupiterian key word, that it feels like perhaps there's a moment where we start to really understand the deeper workings of things here. And by this point, we're about halfway through Jupiter's transits through Gemini, or not quite halfway through, but coming up to the halfway point. And so we've had, a few months at this point of understanding it. And I think that this is a moment of, fate or serendipity, having a hand in something that helps us to just connect the dots a little bit. And the whole nature of fate and that lot of fortune is that it is a little bit mysterious and in that way. So I can feel the edges of it and can't quite articulate how I can feel that in my body. But there's something about this that just feels like we'll look back at it and go, oh, wow, that was such an important moment.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really interesting compared to when we just looked at that Jupiter and Saturn square, that we just had a Mercury cazimi on this chart too. We have just had a Mercury cazimi again, just a couple of days before this as well. So again, something bringing our attention to this Mercury, the messenger who's, talking to us through the sun. And it feels, again, adding that mystery because it's in the heart of the sun.
Yeah, there's really like every time Jupiter's doing something important, there is hard work being done somewhere else in the chart, whether it's Mercury or Venus in or just coming out of or just going into that cazimi phase, which is in the heart of the sun, which is absolutely a point of transformation and very potent transformation as well. Yeah, it's really interesting. And for us here, in Melbourne and under that AEDT time zone, the moon is going to be right at the top of the sky when this happens, and Jupiter is going to be deep below in the roots. So for us here, our experience of this in this, moment, could really be like that fated wisdom is coming from the deep roots, and that the moon is manifesting and showing that in the light that it shines above. And so that's a highly specific chart reading for our little time zone and a way of looking at that, which may not be like everyone will get like a little piece of that, but for this moment, it's interesting to see the way the angles fit in with that as well.
And again, talking from this land of, that the eastern seaboard of Australia, this is the North Node is rising just right on the horizon here as this is happening. So it's like something, again, that feels very serendipitous of something, there's something coming from the future or for the future, this portal that is just rising up as we are sort of moving into this, massive planet that's slowed down and is now just stopped from our point of view, from the Earth's point of view, and turning around. It's just like, wow. I again, as you said, I can't quite articulate what that is, but there's something significant here to pay attention to.
Sure.
October the 9th.
Yeah.
After was that in the new first quarter moon too?
Yeah, would definitely be worth stepping out and looking up on that day and just getting a sense of how that's all feeling.
That's eclipse season as well.
Oh, goody. Yeah, so we would have just had an eclipse like a week before this. Yeah. Awesome. Shall we go to the next chart now?
Yes, let's move on. Enough said about that. Moving on.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so speaking of good news charts, here we have our second Saturn square with Jupiter. And the reason why, and so this is on Christmas Day, to say the least. So 25th of December 2024, 7:30 a.m. AEDT. We have our second Jupiter and Saturn square. And so the reason why this is happening again is because now Jupiter is retrograding. So it's moving backwards towards that aspect that it had already made once earlier in August. And they meet again in this 10th square aspect. And the good news for everyone is that they will meet again next year once Jupiter has left Gemini. And so this is the second of 3 meetings that they will have in that square.
Yeah, and what we have here, that now that Saturn is actually going forward, Saturn is direct, but Jupiter is still moving backwards, remembering that it will station on the 4th of February at 11 degrees. So it's still, it's slowing down again, but it's still, 3 degrees off its, station direct. So it's coming back. So there's something about Saturn, I think, here in its forward movement that feels like has more, I guess, going back to your point rating of who is more dominant here, is like this Saturn, it's more sure of itself. It's had, it's had its time. It's like, yep, no, we're going forward now in this, whatever it's delivering for you. Whereas that Jupiter is sort of still shrinking away, going, oh, I don't know about this. I'm still thinking and I'm still reviewing and oh, I don't know. There's an unsurety here that it's for Jupiter in this position, I feel.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too to see that there is a Mercury-Jupiter opposition happening here, which will perfect over the coming days with Mercury at 11 degrees of Sag. Oh, that's my Mercury return. That's exactly where my Mercury is. Cool.
On my Mars. Happy days.
Happy Christmas to me. So that Jupiter Mercury opposition, when we think about the way the signs of the zodiac are ruled, that's how Jupiter and Mercury are placed. So both Jupiter and Mercury are in detriment. They're in each other's homes, but one of the benefits, this is called mutual reception. And one of the benefits of mutual reception is that when Jupiter is in Mercury's house and Mercury is in Jupiter's house, it's when Jupiter can't figure out how to turn the stove on. He can pick up the phone and call Mercury and go, hey, how do I get this bloody stove working? And Mercury goes, oh, well, you've got to flick it 3 times, click your heels, say a little chant, and then the fire gets started. And if Mercury has problems in the domain of Sagittarius, then he has a direct line back to Jupiter. And so even though they are both sort of fish out of water in those places, they've done a house swap, and there is some support that can be found because they are navigating each other's territory. And so even though neither of them are completely at home in these places, there is support and benefit to be found through that. But I think that what I'm feeling from this Mercury and Jupiter could be some tension between what is true and what we've hoped is true. I think that there's something about a challenge to optimism and a willingness to be honest, and that there may be some kind of oscillating between what we've wanted to believe in and what we've hoped so desperately to be true, and realizing it's just not. Oh, it's another fucking T-square too. Jesus Christ. And so there's Saturn in all of that too, which is, asking us to grow up and to, come on now, like, what this is. You've heard this story before. You can't keep pretending that that horse is a unicorn. It's just a carrot you dipped in glitter. Like, it's really wanting us to be honest. I feel like I say that a lot, but I'm just seeing it a lot in these charts that we've looked at since we've started this podcast journey together, is that there's just such a call for calling something what it really is. And yes, Saturn is really, Saturn is the arrow this time. So in the T-square we had earlier, where we saw Saturn and Venus being the bowstring, being pulled, taut. This time it's Mercury in Sag going blah, 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 and Jupiter and Gemini going blah, 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 and Saturn is that bow is being launched towards Saturn, where Saturn is just like, actually, it is this.
Yeah.
It is not blah, blah, and it is not blah, blah. It is this. And it's a really interesting moment.
It's a really interesting moment. And Mercury here has just stationed direct. So it's on the forward movement. It's already been here before this month, So it's like Saturn. It's been here before. There's something interesting going on about that as well, I think. And what I also see in that bow pulling is that Saturn saying, well, you've had this, Mercury and Sag. I mean, this is a Mercury and Sag podcast because both of us have Mercury and Sag. It can go right out. You can, and it talks from the stars and it makes the wishes from there. And that takes time. But I think what Saturn also is here to show us is like that, again, that eldership, to be able to stand in what you believe in and what the cosmos has shown you, and to take your time in it, because it's that brings that solidness to that dreaming in a very unbounded place in Pisces. So it's yeah, it's really interesting, I think, this call to, yes, it's not what we thought it was, but can you keep dreaming the good dreams anyway and hold yourself accountable to them?
Oh, I love that. And it's made me think of that traditionally speaking, Mercury rules children.
Mm,
And in terms of phases of the life, Jupiter, it's that more mature adult, but then Saturn holds the maturity of the crone, like that
mm,
real true eldership, wisdom that can only come from time. There
mm,
is no other way to win that experience, to win that knowledge. There are some of us who are, born old, or who have seen too much when we're young. And yes, we are wizened for that reason, but there are some things only time can gift to us and tell us. And it kind of feels like we're watching this tension unfold between the childlike consciousness and the adult who thinks it's mature. And you've got this crone just sitting back, not saying anything, because it bloody knows better than to get involved in the young people's nonsense. And but it's Saturn that has the last word there.
yeah.
And that needs, this is important, like that needs to have the last word there.
Mm,
We can't, in this minute, we can't give in to the child. We can't give in to that patriarchy adult who has its own priorities because of the overculture. Like we're needing that outside boundary keeper's perspective, which is what
mm,
Saturn is. Like Saturn is the planet that is farthest away, that can be seen in the sky with the naked eye. And
mm,
so before the invention of the telescope, Saturn was it.
mm,
Saturn, apart from the stars, but in terms of the moving bodies and the planets, Saturn was as far away as it got. And so Saturn rules death and boundaries, partly for that reason. It's deep time.
mm.
And
I'm just
so
getting, as you're talking, what I'm actually sensing is this Saturn in that unbounded Pisces, like talking about the elder, right? Like this last sign of the zodiac that has experienced it all, and this, oh, I just feel it as this all-knowing, all-wise, you know, elder who is looking upon everything and just going, actually, if we all just came out here and looked at the whole thing, there would no, it wouldn't be need for any of this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like it can
Mm,
only be seen through that level of experience. Like
mm,
it doesn't matter how wise you are and what age you are, but there are some things that
mm,
need that mantle of time, and
mm,
also to be closer on the other side of life and to be closer towards death offers us great portals
mm,
of wisdom and knowing that we don't have at other moments in our life. And so yeah, just thinking of that stepping back, and of maybe this is a moment of needing to take the high road at times, and of
mm.
not getting involved in squabbles or
Sounds
big
like Christmas Day to
discussions.
me.
It sounds like Christmas Day to me. Like, yeah, of not being, jostled one way or the other. Whose side are you on? Like, Saturn's like, the earth is round, friends. There are no sides. Like, they're all part of this cyclical spiral experience. And I
Yeah.
wonder if there's something really sobering and beautiful, which can
Mm,
be found if we embrace that. And that's the difference, I think, between petulance
yes.
or of of being really pouty about it and being like, oh, well, that wasn't really what I meant. That wasn't what I was saying. Well, he said it first. Like whatever that, there's something about overruling petulance here, I think, as
Mm,
well. and of like, if we can find our own version of Saturnian maturity and bow low and just be like, you're right, you've called it as it is. And maybe there's nothing else to say to that, and just to hold that and to know that you're still loved and you're still held and welcomed, and you can still come back in, and about calling each other in that way. Yeah, there's, gosh, what a potent moment.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, this is not new information either. We've already had a taste of this Jupiter and Saturn square back in August. So this is like the next installment. And just thinking of this Christmas Day too, is just like, be the Saturn here on this day and just be a witness to whatever is unfolding, and just hold it. Just hold the all and nothingness that does in Pisces, and just feel yourself in the multidimensional layers of what Pisces brings, but being this solidness in that can just be with it all, and just sit back and have your glass of wine and just watch everybody doing their thing.
Yeah, and it makes, I don't know about you and about the people listening to this, but I know that um since October 7 last year, there has been no celebration or family gathering where I have been able to just completely abandon myself to the joy of it.
No.
There, everything has been sobered, and like, what an immense privileged position I am in, to be able to speak of this while not having my life be threatened, or while not being, while I am safe and warm and held and loved, that so many people don't have. But I wonder if there's something here about allowing ourselves, if that is how we feel, to bring that with us, and to not feel like we're going to ruin a good time, or like, it can all be held. There's room for all of that. And if we, as you say so beautifully, Yvonne, like, if we can just show up in as much love as we can muster, and not having to pretend that it's one way or the other, because that's kind of what Mercury and Jupiter are doing here. Mercury going, it's this, and Jupiter's going, no, it's that. And it's like, well, in this moment, can we bring all of that to this table, and still sit at this table together? I don't know. That's sort of, yeah, I can feel in my own experience of compulsory Western gatherings, that I have been bearing a heavy weight with that. And I think that this is a moment of deep trust and learning around that.
Absolutely. And I'm just looking at this sextile that's just happened between Venus and Chiron here in Aries, is that opportunity to become the healer of it. It's like, yeah, that really hurts, but can we be with it again, thinking of that Gemini duality and the contrasting experience of, yes, this and this, and being with it all, but having the grace and again, Venus is in a Saturn ruled sign, Uranus ruled sign, which is the change maker, but it's also the boundary keeper. And just to hold that for ourselves and all that are there. And just I just feel like this sage energy of just going, yeah, well, all this is happening, and come with it with love and grace, but be the healer of it as well, and bring whatever needs to come into that situation with love.
Do you know something else that just really landed for me with this? And maybe this is just my own sentiment that I need to reflect on. I think, well, I know that our culture does not tend our elderly well.
No, that's
We
right.
have very, very poor, and that is being so diplomatic to the point of being untrue. We have such poor relations with our elderly.
Yes.
And as the granddaughter of my most beautiful oppa, who has Alzheimer's and has recently moved into a home, like, of feeling how difficult it is in our culture to stay connected, and to hold him, and to hold us as a family as we move through that experience together. But it is moments like Christmas and birthdays, and it is those moments of celebration where everyone does come in, where we may not have a great deal of contact with that generation and with that age group. Otherwise, if we're not working in that field or, having that familial link regularly, then something like Christmas Day might be one of the few times in the year that we are actually able to just listen to the stories and to their wisdom and to that understanding. And something in that's really landing for me too, and what I'm going to bring this Christmas, which feels so far away to be talking about this.
But here we are.
I'm going to really bring my listening ears this Christmas and really just kneel at the feet of those elders, and also kneeling at the feet of my elder ancestors and calling them in as well.
Yeah.
Because there are not many opportunities, I think, culturally speaking, to do that. And so that really fits for me.
Absolutely. And in saying that, I'm just looking at this Pluto here that's now traveling direct after its retrograde period, making a trine to the south node and a sextile to the north node, as well as Mars is doing the opposite. So it's really, really interesting that this Pluto, this, and I also at times link Pluto to the ancestors, of times past, and having this easy access to the portal of the past, the south node, and creating something new for the future. That there's something in that too, and to do with this Mars here that's in retrograde. As we said, this Mars has been journeying so closely with this Jupiter that it's making this aspect to the north node at the same time.
There's another one of those big configurations that's kind of looping around and around there, and bringing in that Pluto-Mars opposition that will be perfecting over the coming week, and feeling like I want to make sure I really fucking listened.
Yes.
On Christmas Day, coming into a Pluto-Mars opposition, because that's a volatile aspect, especially with Mars in retrograde. Like, that has the capacity to hold pain and difficulty. And when we talk about the ordeals of the underworld, that would certainly be a marker of one of those. And so, like, to be really listening and going a little deeper and letting Saturn call me in, and remembering too, like, Christmas Day is the day that Jupiter-Saturn square goes exact. They will be slowly coming into aspect with each other for a couple of weeks, before and after. So there'll be a vibe, and you're not going to miss it if you're not listening on Christmas Day. But I think that's that maturity, and that not getting distracted by the frivolous talk on top, and listening to what's really being said underneath, I think is something that eldership holds really well.
Absolutely. And it's like for the us in the southern hemisphere, it's just past summer solstice, so it's like the peak energy as well, so which will really call us to slow down, I think, at this point, when usually what would be like very high intensity of energy that's pulling us out and out and out, this is actually pulling us back in the stillness of, really, it feels like in the northern hemisphere, and winter solstice feels like it would be quite nurturing. But for us down here in the southern hemisphere, that summer solstice, that peak, I can see where that tension of that square, in this really peak period time of the full sun, and this busyness of this time, this, wanting to move fast, but actually the call to slow down and to, and with this Mars involved here, that's sort of, coming into that opposition to Pluto, is like, I think it's time to really fucking slow down, actually. And because it could go really wrong otherwise, like, it has potential for accidents and as well, but it's something just to be aware of.
Yeah, and like, giving yourself permission to be how you want to be at this time of year. I think so
Mm,
few of us give ourselves permission to connect with what we need or to connect what keeps us well, let alone sane.
mm,
I think that there can be an immense amount of pressure to put ourselves amongst family dynamics that are toxic at best and abusive at worst, or to feel like we have to do it all or be everything for
mm,
everybody, or like there's just so many demands that happen here. And I think that there's
mm,
only going to be so much of putting up with that, with some of the configurations happening, and giving ourselves permission to not play a game we didn't sign up for or that we just don't have the capacity for, can help us to opt out of some of those more sensitive things that are happening, where we're kind of taking ourselves out of pain's way or of harm's way. So also being aware that maybe there are things that we feel we can't say no to,
mm,
but actually we can say no to, and leaning into that at this time, for the
mm.
time of year that it is. This can be a really hard time of year for some. So I think, yeah, this is my explicit full permission to anyone listening here for Christmas Day to do what they need to do to be well, not what
Absolutely.
they feel they need to do to make
Yeah.
others happy.
Yeah.
Poo-poo.
And
None
also,
of
and just looking at this square to the sun of the nodes, like, here and here, which is another, to
mm.
even come out and shine is going to be tricky. Like, there's a this tension here of like, oh, do I have to shine? And if you push yourself too much, like, I don't think, yeah, I don't know whether it end well. Like, like
Nah.
it feels like it could lead to exhaustion of the needing to keep shining and to keep showing up in the full light in the peak period. But when we're actually being called in and to find stillness, yeah, that.
Yeah, and that sensitive point when a planet is within about a 2-degree orb of that square with the
Mm,
nodes.
mm,
It's called the nodal bending. And the
mm,
nodes in general are, yeah, very otherworldly, weird with a Y. Like, yeah, time bendy.
mm.
I can feel the portal opening and I'm
Yeah.
like, not today. The nodal bendings are strange.
Mm,
Um, and when a planet moves through them, it's kind of like, those stories of people who go and sit under a fairy tree and disappear, and then 30 years later they pop back out again, the same age they were when they left. Like, that's the kind of energy that nodal bending holds. And with the sun being there, the luminaries are particularly affected by those nodal bendings. And so there may be a very real call to what ourselves, in terms of our identity and how we choose to radiate, what we choose for ourselves. There could be a real reckoning around our options there, and with what, those choices, really feeling the weight of those choices, like
mm,
what am I going to choose for myself, and what part of my identity am I nourishing or
mm.
taxing through my choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Shall we move
Okay.
on?
Shall we shall.
All right.
Good old Christmas Day. Okay.
So this is Jupiter's direct station on the 4th of February 2025 at 8:41 p.m. AEDT.
Yeah. And it's stationing direct at 11 degrees and 16 minutes here in Gemini. And it's making a trine aspect back to Mercury. Look at that.
Isn't that
What?
like, it's just Mercury is in such prominent yeah, it's quite profound actually.
And again, look, how close is Mercury with the sun? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a real pattern, one could say there.
Mm,
And we can see here again, like a marker I don't typically use in transits, but that lot of fortune just
mm,
still being within, within an orb sort of a degree-based orb of Jupiter there. There's just something really fated about this moment. And
mm,
I can't remember if it's one of my favorite astrologers. It's either Chris Brennan or Austin Coppock who
mm,
talk about when I think it's Austin, when a planet stations, it's like everyone stops and that planet gets up on its soapbox and it taps the mic a couple of times and it says, I have something to say. And it's a moment where it gets a moment where time stands still just for this little minute. And so the stations are really important and they
mm,
bookend the retrogrades. And so the charts of the stations give us an idea of what is it that Jupiter is tapping on this mic for.
mm.
Like, it's holding the wine glass up, it's going ding, 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 ding. And the whole dinner is kind of going into a hush while it says something important. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just looking at across here, what's happening over here? This is the nodal points. The nodes have moved now into Pisces and Virgo, and
Huge.
it's like this is the North Node deep in conversation with Neptune. Like, there's something being said here about, what dreams are we moving through to the future with, and how funny that this Venus has just tipped into like maybe that day or within a day or so of this stationing direct, like moving into this point of the start of the zodiac, why across the North Node and Neptune at the same time. Like there's this whole thing happening here at the point of the last degree of the zodiac and the first degree of the zodiac, which is going to inform us even more so when that Neptune moves into Aries later on, really not long after that, actually, which is really interesting, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just it's one of those things like when you look at a natal chart, if the same story is being sung up 3 or 4 or 5 different ways, it's safe to say that that story is going to be very alive and obvious and real. It's one of the ways that when we look at a chart with so many different points and bits and things going on, it's one of the ways we whittle things down to what's really important here. And so with Jupiter stationing, getting ready to move direct again and having that moment on the soapbox to speak
Mm,
at this moment where this North Node, which is just this perpetual manifesting portal,
mm.
and Neptune being there of like, what weird shit can we make together? Like what should we throw out of this trip? It's a really, it's it's like Jupiter's on the soapbox after having a couple too many mushrooms, maybe might be what comes out here.
But
But
to
they're
share the experience of the journey that it's had, during its retrograde phase, and it's like, this is what I learned from this psychedelic journey, and this is where we need to go now into the future. But, with this portal open up, this feels weird and wacky. And what even is this time at a time moment of really casting the dreams out through that North Node portal and Neptune coming to meet and Venus right there. Like it just feels really interesting.
and we have like I don't always weave Chiron in so strongly, but it's just so prominent. And like I think especially with the astrology the last couple of months and
Mm.
how heavily Chiron featured, it's begging for attention. And
Yes.
look at this like almost perfect square again with Mars and Chiron. And it's like again, it's like bring the bleeding parts of you, right? Mars is so connected with rulership of the blood and the iron that is so essential to the formation of blood. And then Chiron being literally the wounded healer, like what part of you is bleeding? What part of you needs tending? there's just, yeah, there's this incredible story happening with Mars and Chiron too, and it feels like I feel like a broken record, but it's like bring the suffering and the pain, bring the dreaming, let it all inform each other. And here we also have Mars trining Saturn as well. So, some of that story, like the big configurations that we've looked at in Jupiter's journey have so heavily featured, in particular, Mars and Saturn with like the T squares and the grand square and things like that. That whatever it is that Jupiter is standing up to say in this moment, he's got a diverse crowd of sad folk and tripping folk, like there's a lot of sad folk and there's a lot of tripping folk in this audience of his in this moment. But I really trust in whatever wisdom Jupiter has gained so far through its time in Gemini, that it has something to unite them. And maybe that's a part of what's going on here. Like Jupiter, I don't think Jupiter has any particularly strong aspects with any of those things going on. Like it will be coming into that third square, but that's not for a couple more months with Saturn. It really,
we have a trine.
Trine with Mercury, but that just feels like more communicative power, like it's a megaphone being spoken into a microphone, which also has speakers in the room. Like it's this message that gets blasted. And I feel like all the other things in this chart are actually all of the people receiving Jupiter's wisdom at this time, rather than it being a part of the story Jupiter is bringing. So what wisdom do we have at this time that can connect us to pieces or people or events that otherwise feel separate?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is on the podium at this point. Yeah.
And just so interesting too to see that the midheaven, right, like, so the angles move very, very quickly. So within half an hour, that angle will be well and truly on the other side of Jupiter. But the fact that so close to that station, Jupiter is right at the top of the sky. Like, what better place to put your soapbox, right? Than at the
right,
exact, like
everybody can
zenith.
see.
Yeah.
And so, at this time is to bring awareness to the Gemini area of your life and to see what it has to say, because it'd be quite loud, I think. Yeah. And pay attention, because it has something clear to say. For example, if Jupiter is in your 5th house and you're really busy with work and all the things like that, it's that call to listen to the children. It's like that, what area of your life needs to speak up and to be heard at this point, wherever Gemini is. It could be in your 7th house, a relationship. What's the relationship saying that's going to sort of override the rest of the areas of your chart? So it's paying attention to this real life experience. The embodiment of this is find out where Jupiter is in your chart and what house it is, and to find out what that house is all about. So, I mean, it's obviously going to be really loud anyway through this transit, because, it's the whole time that Jupiter is in Gemini. But for this particular occasion on the 4th of February, or around about this time, this will be particularly vocal. And so to pay attention to that, because it's got something wise to tell us, because it's been through a journey.
Yeah. And so from here, from this direct station, Jupiter will move slowly for a few weeks and will then start to pick up speed, and will just exit Gemini and is then on to another year where it will be in Cancer. Are you feeling ready to open up that chart?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to pay attention to Mars. It's still here.
Yes.
Still here. Coming to February, it's still here.
I think that's very close to the station direct there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's fairly close. So but it's still here it hasn't moved very far. It's only moved like, 2 houses away from where all the action with Jupiter has been. So this too, I think, is very important because Jupiter will be here soon, we'll be in Cancer and then into Leo into 26. So yeah, it's just fascinating just to watch Mars just going, oh God, you haven't really moved at all.
Yeah, the way that Mars, it takes so long to slow down. I think
Mm,
that where Mars usually spends between like 4 to 6 weeks per sign,
mm,
when it retrogrades, I think it's 6 months.
yeah.
It's 6 months that it stays within that, 20 or
Mm,
30 degrees that it's retrograding in and out of. And so even just thinking that we looked at a Mars conjunction with Jupiter so many months ago, like back in
August.
June or
Yeah.
August.
Yeah.
And since then, Mars hasn't gotten more than 2 signs away. So there's been no opportunity for the tension and the growth point of the square. There's certainly been no opposition moment. It's really whatever happens with Jupiter and Mars, in like August, whatever, in
Mm.
2024, is really still marinating, like they're not, it's not separating to really fully birth and come out on its own and
Mm.
emerge as an autonomous creation or
Yeah.
event.
Ah, it's epic.
So freaking epic.
It's so freaking.
Okay.
And our
So
last part.
last chart, I am going to cast a vote for making this a short chart because it's
Yes.
10:15 and I'm starting to feel
Oh, yeah.
my eyes cross a little bit.
I think it's also the explanation of what it's going to feel like by the time that Jupiter finally does move into Cancer. It'll be like, holy shit, that was a big journey.
Feeling that it's
Feeling-
it's immense though. It's freaking amazing. And honestly, like there's just so much to talk about
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
But I think it's part of the willingness to look at it later and let it unfold. But so this is the 10th of June of 2025, 7:03 a.m. AEST, where Jupiter is again at 00 degrees, but this time of Cancer. So having finished its journey in Gemini.
Yeah, and look who's with it. Ta-da! Mercury. Mercury is
Huzzah!
with it. And so Mercury, it feels like this, it's leading the way out of its home sign. It's just like, come on, I know the secret door. Let's come this way. Like,
Yeah.
it feels very serendipitous that Mercury is the messenger or the way shower of how to lead Jupiter out of this year of Jupiter and Gemini. It's so funny. It's so
Yeah.
funny. So typical of that play that is come in and just like, here we go. Isn't this funny?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing to see, and it feels really yeah, especially because Jupiter moves out of detriment.
Mm.
It kind of feels like, being like 20 meters from the finish line and being like, oh, I can't do it. And Mercury's like, just again, and kind of like zips in, zips out. Let's go. Here we are. See, you did it. Well done, you. And then you zip off away again and do something else. But Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. This is such a place of prominence for
Mm.
Jupiter. And even though the moment Jupiter enters Cancer, we have these the third square coming up with Saturn and a square coming up with Neptune, like big, heavy, immense, important stuff to come. There
Mm.
is such a coming into power here,
Mm.
where Jupiter really does have the upper hand. And so all of these different incredible points of tension and growth, as Jupiter has moved through Gemini,
Mm.
this is where Jupiter is now like as resourced to the teeth, able to influence and create change and spread the wisdom that he wants to.
Absolutely. And just really interesting to note that just to show how big a time this is and just how, again, what we've spoken about through this whole podcast of Jupiter showing us of what's to come and to take note, because as soon as this Jupiter moves into Cancer, like we've just before that, big players, Neptune, is in Aries. It's been in Pisces, I don't know for how long. It feels like friggin' years.
12 years,
Yeah,
14
12
years,
years.
something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, 12 or 14.
Long time, right? And Saturn as well, moving into like the first degrees of Aries, the start of the zodiac. We've got, this newness here of again, Pluto into Aquarius, 3 degrees really early. And then not long after that, we're going to have, Uranus change signs into where Jupiter has just been. Like this, this moment, this sort of, this time in 2025, it's so big and such a time of change, a changing of the guard. And it's actually Jupiter that's leading the way. So just to recap, this is why this transit of Jupiter and Gemini is so friggin' important, because it's informing us of what the feels of what to sort of expect for what's to come. I just, it's so potent these next couple of years because of this. Like, yeah, it feels like the game has changed. Like something's, we're definitely not in like Kansas anymore.
Kansas anymore.
We're gone. That's long gone. Kansas is fucking, it's gone. You can't even see it. Like it just feels like we're just not there anymore. Like I don't even know what this is. It's just something different.
Absolutely, yeah, for real. And I think too, like, if there was a moment to have your lifeline be really well resourced, this is the moment you want that lifeline in place. This is the moment you pick to bring out, I don't want to say the big guns because it's just such a wrong analogy for Jupiter and Cancer, but this is where you bring out just everything you could possibly need to be well and nourished and loved and supported in your values and beliefs, like, and then some. Jupiter is like, you wanted ice cream? Well, here's a sundae that will feed 20 people with, 60 cherries on top and, 70 different colored sprinkles. And it's not just a bowl of ice cream, it's all of the excess and the beauty and the extra. And so, like, to have Jupiter in this most exalted position of Cancer while we are figuring out what does it mean to have Saturn begin its 2.5-year transit through Aries? What does it mean to have Neptune begin a 12-year transit in Aries with Chiron present? Yeah, like what does it mean to be winding up with Uranus in transit? Thank fuck GDFO, you could just like get the fuck out of Taurus, get off my moon, and into Gemini. I'm going to whinge about that every episode until that happens. You've heard it here first. Prepare yourselves for whinging about Uranus and Taurus until approximately like October 2025. So Jupiter really is the balm while we figure out what all of that is. And even though Pluto will have been in these early degrees of Aquarius for well over a year at this point, it's still the beginning of a 22-year transit. It's still early days. It's still lighting up those degrees of beginning, like the 0, 1, 2, 3 through to 5, 6 degrees. So yeah, I seeing Mercury there as that chaperone is quite a thing of beauty.
Yeah. And how fascinating is this movement between the moon, in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's home sign, making a sextile to this 3 degrees in Pluto in Aquarius, coming back down to whatever the hell is happening here with Saturn and Neptune, and then trining. That there's something here too that's unfolding that's really interesting and related back to that Jupiterian energy that the moon is holding here.
And I think too, like there's been a couple of charts we've looked at which have had the moon in Sag, like that Jupiter ruled moon, just really offering where the moon really imports its stories or who it's in conversation with into the material world and into reality. It's like Jupiter has just come into this immense position of power, but then also has the moon doing its bidding in Jupiter's domicile of Sagittarius. And it's only just entered Sag too. So it's got pretty much the full 2 days that the moon spends in any given sign, 2.5 days, of really weaving its magic and frankly, like pushing the thumb down on Saturn a little bit there too. Like Jupiter is just so immense in this moment, partly because of the exaltation, but also because it's about to rule the upcoming full moon.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. And look, Mars still hasn't moved out at Leo. Oh, it's good on you. You're almost there, Mars. You're almost there. It's been hard, I know, but you're almost there.
Almost. And even, oh my God, look, there's another aspect to Chiron here. Honestly, you can't make this shit up. It's within 13 minutes of another trine with Chiron, but that is a supportive aspect. A trine is a supportive aspect. And so this really is like this 12-month period of Jupiter and Gemini is just shifting through so much tension and getting to the bottom of things so we can be ready when the real shit goes down. Like we think shit went down in this 12 months we've talked about. Like, oh, no, sweet summer child. You just wait and see the shit that will go down over here. And yeah, like that supportive aspect, like maybe, dare I say it, has Mars learned a thing or two about being in pain or how it uses wounds, how Mars's wounds dictate the action that it takes. It's just had a retrograde, and in Cancer, a deeply feeling, soft, squishy hearted sign, while making multiple tense aspects to Chiron. And here we have Mars coming out of that and with that more supportive aspect. Like, how do those wounds start to become constructive rather than destructive? Destructive, oh God, deconstructive. It's time to say goodnight, isn't it?
Yes, so that's how we end. But we're going to keep coming back to this time and time again. These charts. This has just been a snapshot as to what this looks like. What does Jupiter in Gemini look like as it moves through Gemini?
It is definitely time to say
it's time to go. It is. But yes, and also that example of the larger cycles at play, as we just saw that, that Neptune and Saturn there moved into a new sign. Uranus is about to move a new sign. Pluto's in a new sign. Like these very early degrees being triggered of something of the big players. So it's really interesting to really pay attention to what Jupiter is offering you wherever Gemini is in your chart, and to know that it's going to be speaking to, and it's got a lot to say. Of course, Jupiter, the planet of expansion, into Gemini, the planet, the sign of communication. A lot to say.
Yeah, at the very least.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so wonderful. I'm so glad that we did this together. Thank you.
Me too. And I'm so glad this is, and we hope to do more of this. We'll do our monthly charts, transit podcasts, but to do these, specials every now and again, I think just brings another layer and more depth to what we want to speak to and what we want to share, and hopefully hear your feedback of your experiences of what this is, so we can learn more together. And this practice of embodiment of the stars feels very potent at this time, as you could see what's coming. It feels very important to speak of.
Yeah, really, it does. I'd love to hear your thoughts and where it resonates and where it doesn't. You can connect with us there by leaving comments wherever you're listening or watching this, whether that's YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but mostly our home is patreon.com/the sentient sky. Please come and visit us there. That is where we pour most of our announcements and musings and extra things we want to share and reminders if a full moon is coming up or if it's winter solstice or whatever. You can follow us for free, or you can join one of our tiers, which helps us do this work and to keep showing up to do this work, which is very, very special.
It's very special. And yeah, and when we just want to share this wisdom and also gain the wisdom from you. So, that Patreon membership really helps us to, I guess, all of us to grow and to support each other even more so. So very exciting. Becky, what have you got coming up? What's happening?
I am having 20% off all of my flower essences until the end of May. So if you've been thinking about connecting with a plant ally from my online apothecary of enchanted herbal medicines, then have a look. They're also on the shelf at the Good Food Emporium in Narre Warren, which is lovely to have an in real life spot. There are elixirs there that you can test and taste as well, which is very special. I am actually looking at taking a little break from clinical practice over winter. So if you had if you're a client of mine or you wanted to get in touch about something, then by golly, get in quick because I am about to hibernate. But I think that that's everything for me. What about you?
Yes, so I have the next round opening up for the Temple of New Wheat Astrological Study Group, which is very, very exciting. We're just doing the groundwork of setting up a new Patreon for that, and bringing that a bit more formal because it's been sort of, playing up until now, and it's time to bring that out and to make it more accessible to more people. So that will be happening in the next few weeks. We have our Invoking Inanna journey through the underworld. So following Inanna's myth through 7 gates of releasing what no longer serves and in deep, deep ritual. And then we sit in the underworld for 3 weeks and then we reclaim ourselves back into the light. It's such a powerful journey. We do only 2 a year. And the next one begins on the 17th of June, which is online. And also we have a little bit of face-to-face. But last journey, we had a couple of people who lived interstate. So amazing women, one in Sydney and another one in Adelaide. And that really worked as well. Even though they couldn't come to the face-to-face gathering, it still worked. And we had that. Yeah. So it doesn't matter where you are. It's such a profound journey. And we're going to be talking more about that. The one-on-one readings continue, and there's some other things in the pipeline that watch this space. It feels very exciting to be doing this. So exciting. And more of this, more of the sentient sky. We love this work. And we're going to record our monthly transits for June this week, and that will be released at the end of June. And for those who are on our higher tiers of our Patreon, you will get early access to that, which is very friggin' exciting. And those who are also in the higher membership of our Patreon will get the monthly worksheet as well, is to make it more personalized for you. So that's some of the benefits if you come and join our paid tiers of our Patreon. That's it. I think we're done as I start to lose my voice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for listening. This has been fun. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, stay tuned for our June monthly transit podcast.
Can't wait. See you all then.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for listening to The Sentient Sky. Follow us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thesentientsky for episode updates, our contact info, events and offerings, and to connect with us and our co-created community. Thank you so much to each and every patron for their support and presence within that community.
Deep gratitude to our ancestors, guides, and to the green world of the earth and the cosmic sky. May we ever be acting in service to the highest good of all beings. We pay our deepest respect to the First Nations people and to the elders past, present and emerging, to the Wadawurrung and the Jurjur-Wadawurrung country people. We give great thanks to the continuing connection to the land, sky, sea and their communities. We also like to express our deepest of gratitudes to our own ancestors and to the land, sea and sky of their origins. Both of us would like to thank our teachers, families, friends and communities that support us and inspire us in this cosmic work. Especially big love to our beautiful children for whom this is ultimately for.
Great thanks to my brother, Daniel Van Horsen, for allowing us to use his original music, whom you can find on Facebook for details on his offerings as a session musician and sound engineer. Until next time, see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Much love. Bye.